A 7-year-old girl walks into a biker bar on the coldest afternoon Black Ridge, Ohio has seen in 20 years. She's carrying a backpack older than she is and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. She doesn't cry. She doesn't flinch when 7 men in leather cuts turn to stare at her. She walks straight to the biggest, most scarred man at the table and asks him, calm as a surgeon, how to get to the county orphanage. Not because she's lost, because she's been memorizing the route for months, because she thinks she's going to need it. What happens next will crack something open inside you that you didn't know was still soft. Stay with me until the very end of this one. Hit that like button, drop a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. And whatever you do, don't stop listening. The rain hadn't stopped in 4 days. It came down in sheets across the rusted skyline of Black Ridge, Ohio. A town that used to make steel and now made nothing but excuses. Half the storefronts on Main Street were boarded. The old Monarch Mill sat like a rotting tooth against the gray horizon, its smokestacks cold for 11 years. The kind of place where people didn't leave because they wanted to stay. They stayed because leaving cost money they didn't have. Marge's Diner sat at the edge of Route 9, just past the railroad overpass where the freight train still screamed through at 2 in the morning. It was a flat-roofed cinder block building with a neon coffee cup in the window that hadn't worked right since Clinton was president. The M flickered. The A was dead. What remained just read RGEs. Nobody fixed it. Nobody cared. Inside, the air was thick with fryer grease and the smell of coffee that had been sitting on the burner since dawn. 4 booths along the window. A counter with 9 stools, 3 of them cracked. A jukebox in the corner that only played if you kicked it twice on the left side. The lunch crowd had cleared out an hour ago. What remained were the ones who didn't have anywhere else to be. 7 men occupied the 2 back booths, leather cuts over flannel and thermals. Iron Wolves MC, the Black Ridge chapter, what was left of it. 12 members at peak, 7 now. The rest had either moved south, gone to prison, or died in ways that didn't make the newspaper. They weren't a gang. They were what happened when the VA failed you and the factory closed and your wife left, and the only people who didn't flinch when they saw your scars were men who carried their own. Jace Mercer sat at the head of the back booth, his shoulders pressed against the cracked vinyl. Road captain, 41 years old, 6'2", 220, with hands that had rebuilt transmissions and broken jaws in equal measure. His cut read Vandal on a patch below his left collarbone, a name he'd earned at 19 in a fight he didn't start and barely survived. His face carried the kind of stillness that made strangers look away. Not because he was threatening, because something behind his eyes suggested he'd already seen whatever you were about to show him, and it hadn't impressed him then either. He was halfway through his second cup of black coffee when the door opened. The bell above the frame gave its tired little rattle, and the cold air hit the room like a slap. Everyone looked up. Reflex. You hear a door in a place like Black Ridge, you check who's walking through it. Old habit, survival habit. She was small, impossibly small for the weather she'd just walked through, 7 years old maybe. Thin arms sticking out of a corduroy jacket 2 sizes too big. The sleeves rolled up at the wrist so her fingers could grip the straps of a backpack that sagged like it carried everything she owned. Brown hair plastered to her forehead by the rain, mud on her shoes. And tucked under her right arm, pressed against her ribs like a secret, a stuffed rabbit. Gray, matted, 1 ear missing, the stitching pulled loose where the other used to be. She didn't hesitate at the door, didn't scan the room the way a lost kid would, wide-eyed, searching for a safe face. She walked in like she'd been here before, like she'd rehearsed this. Marge looked up from behind the counter, dish towel over her shoulder. Honey, you okay? Where's your... The girl walked past her, straight down the aisle between the counter and the booths, past 2 truckers who stopped chewing, past a woman in a postal uniform who set down her fork. She walked all the way to the back of the diner, stopped in front of the booth where Jace Mercer sat surrounded by men in leather, and looked up at him with brown eyes that held no fear at all. Can you tell me how to get to the orphanage? The diner went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a slow afternoon. The ugly quiet. The kind that crawls across your skin because something just entered the room that nobody knows how to hold. Jay set his coffee down. Didn't blink. Didn't smile. He'd spent 22 years training his face to show nothing, and this was the first time in a long time it actually cost him something to keep it still. "Which orphanage?" he said. His voice was low, gravel and engine oil. "The county one," the girl said. "St. Anne's. It's on Ridgefield Road. You take Route 9 east for 6 miles, then turn left at the light where the old gas station is. Then it's another 2 miles. There's a sign, but the sign is broken, so you have to look for the brick wall with the green gate." She recited it the way a child recites a poem they've been made to memorize for school. Precise. Practiced. No hesitation. Like she'd traced the route in her mind 100 times. The man to Jace's left, Danny Wire Kosinski, a skinny ex-combat medic with a silver front tooth and a tremor in his right hand that hadn't stopped since Fallujah, leaned forward. "You need to go to the orphanage?" "I think I should live there now," she said. The words landed in the booth like a grenade with the pin pulled. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed for a count of 3. Jace's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed once at his temple. He reached for his coffee, then stopped, put his hand flat on the table instead. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila." "Lila what?" "Hartwell. Lila Grace Hartwell." "Where do you live, Lila Grace Hartwell?" "Willow Creek Road, number 47, the blue house. But it's not really blue anymore." "Where's your dad?" Something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something a 7-year-old shouldn't know how to carry. "He's sad," she said. "He's been sad for a really long time." Jace looked at Wire. Wire looked at the man across from him, a broad-shouldered black man named Curtis Forge Williams, who ran the club's auto shop and hadn't spoken in 30 minutes because Curtis only spoke when it mattered. Forge met Jace's eyes and gave a single nod. The kind of nod that said whatever comes next, we're in. "How did you get here, Lila?" Jace asked. "I walked." "From Willow Creek?" "Yes." That was 3 miles. 3 miles in the rain, in October, in a jacket that didn't fit, with a stuffed rabbit under her arm. 3 miles to a biker diner on the edge of town. "Does your dad know you're here?" She didn't answer. She hugged the rabbit tighter. Marge appeared beside the booth with a glass of chocolate milk and set it on the table without a word. Lila looked at it but didn't reach for it. Her eyes stayed on Jace. "I don't want to go home," she said quietly. "He'll be mad." "Why would he be mad?" "Because I left, and because I know about the paper." "What paper?" She pressed her lips together. The rabbit's remaining ear bent against her chin. "The paper that says I go away." The rain hammered the roof. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. Somewhere in the kitchen, the fryer popped and hissed. Jace sat perfectly still, but underneath the table, his right hand had closed into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. Because he knew exactly what paper she was talking about. He'd seen one just like it 33 years ago. Different name, same result. A parent signing a line. A kid becoming a file number. A family becoming a ghost. He'd been 8 years old when his mother signed his. "You're not going to the orphanage," Jace said. The words came out harder than he intended, not angry, final. Lila blinked. "But I memorized the way." "I heard you. You're still not going." He slid out of the booth and stood up. 6 feet 2 inches of scarred muscle and leather, and a man who hadn't felt anything this sharp since the day his mother left him standing on the steps of a county building in Columbus with a trash bag full of clothes. "Wire. Forge. Let's go." Danny was already on his feet. Curtis was already pulling on his gloves. "Where are we going?" Lila asked. Jace looked down at her. The fluorescent light caught the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jawline, a souvenir from a man who no longer had teeth. "We're taking you home." "I told you, I heard what you told me." He crouched down until he was eye level with her, close enough that she could see the gray in his stubble, and the lines around his eyes, and the way his pupils dilated like a man who was fighting something inside himself that he couldn't name. "And I'm telling you something different. You're going home. We're going to find your dad, and nobody's going to any orphanage. Not today." She studied his face the way children study adults when they're trying to figure out if the words match the truth. It was a look Jace recognized. He'd worn it himself a long time ago. "Okay," she said. The rain was coming sideways when they stepped outside. Jace pulled his collar up and looked at the lineup of bikes in the gravel lot. 7 Harleys, chrome and matte, black and patina. Machines that had crossed state lines and outrun cops, and carried men who trusted nothing but each other and the road. He turned to Wire. "Get the truck." Wire jogged to the corner of the lot where a beat-up F-150 with Iron Wolves stickers on the tailgate sat under a busted floodlight. He fired it up. The engine coughed, caught, and settled into a rough idle. Jace opened the passenger door and looked at Lila. "Get in. You'll be warm." She climbed in without a word, sat in the middle of the bench seat, backpack in her lap, rabbit in her arms. Wire slid behind the wheel. Jace walked back to the bikes. "Forge, you're with me. Rest of you, hold here. I'll call if we need bodies." A man at the edge of the group, bald, barrel-chested, a prosthetic left hand visible below his cut sleeve, spoke up. "What if it's bad?" Jace swung a leg over his bike. A 2003 Road King with a rebuilt engine and enough miles on it to circle the earth twice. "Then we make it less bad." He kicked the engine to life. The sound ripped through the parking lot. A deep, chest-rattling rumble that shook the rain off the chrome and sent a vibration through the gravel that you could feel in your teeth. Forge mounted beside him. 2 bikes, 1 truck, a 7-year-old girl who'd walked 3 miles to ask strangers for directions to a place she should never have to go. Willow Creek Road was 10 minutes east if you took the back way through the Mill District. They took it fast. The bikes leaned through turns on wet asphalt, tires hissing, headlights carving through the downpour. The truck followed close behind, Wire driving steady, Lila sitting between nothing and no one, her reflection a pale smear in the rain-streaked windshield. Number 47 sat at the end of a dead-end street where the pavement turned to gravel and the gravel turned to mud. It had been blue once. Now it was the color of neglect. Paint flaking in patches, gutters hanging loose, a porch railing that listed to the left like a drunk leaning on a wall. The yard was more mud than grass. A plastic tricycle, faded pink, sat overturned near the steps. The front door was open. Not ajar. Open. Wide open, like someone had walked out and never looked back. Jace killed his engine. Forge did the same. The sudden silence was louder than the bikes had been. Just rain. Just the creak of the porch. Just the hollow sound of a house breathing through an open mouth. Jace dismounted and walked toward the door. His boots sank into the mud with every step. He could smell it before he reached the threshold. The smell of a house that had stopped being lived in. Cold air. Dust. Something sour underneath, like milk left on a counter. The mailbox at the edge of the porch was stuffed full. He pulled a handful out without stopping. Bills, final notices, a letter from the county stamped in red, another from a collection agency, a pink slip from the electric company dated 3 weeks ago. He stepped inside. The living room was almost empty. A couch sat against the far wall, cushions sagging, a blanket balled up on one end. No TV, no pictures on the walls, just the rectangular shadows where frames used to hang, the wallpaper lighter in those spots, like the ghost outlines of a life that had been taken down piece by piece. The kitchen was worse. Cabinets open. No food except a half-empty box of cereal on the counter and a jar of peanut butter with a spoon still in it. The refrigerator hummed, but when Jace opened it, the light was dead and the shelves held nothing but a gallon of milk 3 days past its date. He climbed the stairs. 14 steps, and 8 of them groaned. At the top, a hallway with 3 doors. The first was a bathroom. No towels, no soap, a faucet dripping into a stained basin. The second was a bedroom, a child's bedroom. Small, a mattress on the floor with a blanket covered in faded cartoon characters, a stack of library books on an overturned crate used as a nightstand, crayons on the floor, a drawing taped to the wall. Stick figures, 2 of them, one tall, one small, holding hands. Above them, a yellow circle for the sun. Below them, a word in careful, uneven letters. Home. Jace stood in that doorway for 11 seconds. He counted them, because if he didn't count, he was going to put his fist through the wall. The third door was the master bedroom. A mattress on the floor here too, but the sheets were gone. A pile of clothes in the corner. Work boots caked in mud. And on the floor beside the mattress, a cardboard box filled with papers. He crouched and went through it. Pay stubs from 6 months ago, Eric Hartwell, employed by Blackridge Municipal Services, grounds maintenance. A termination letter dated April. Medical bills. His wife's name on them. Margaret Hartwell. Oncology department. Radiology. Hospice care. The dates told the story. Diagnosed in January, gone by March. Everything after that was just gravity. Bills unpaid. Income gone. A man standing in the wreckage of a life that had collapsed so fast he was still reaching for walls that weren't there. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, was a single document. Jace pulled it out and read it under the gray light from the window. Voluntary surrender of parental rights. State of Ohio. County of Sullivan. Name of child. Lila Grace Hartwell. Name of custodial parent. Eric Raymond Hartwell. The signature line was empty, but a pen sat beside it. Cap off. Jace held the document in both hands. The paper trembled, not because his hands were shaking, because something inside his chest had started to move. Something heavy, something with teeth, and he couldn't stop it. He read the document again. Read the part where it said, "In the best interest of the minor child." Read the part where a man was supposed to write his name and let his daughter become a ward of the state. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he stood and walked downstairs. Wire was in the living room, Lila beside him. She'd set her backpack on the couch and was holding the rabbit with both hands, looking around the empty room the way someone looks at a place they've already said goodbye to. "He's not here," Jay said. Lila didn't seem surprised. "He's usually not here at night." "Where does he go?" "I don't know. He comes back in the morning sometimes. Sometimes he doesn't." Wire caught Jace's eye. The question passed between them without words. "How long has this been going on?" "Lila," Jace said, keeping his voice level, "when's the last time your dad was home?" She thought about it. Really thought, the way a child does when they're trying to be accurate because they think it matters. "Tuesday. He brought cereal." It was Saturday, 4 days. A 7-year-old girl had been alone in an empty house with no heat and no food for 4 days. She'd eaten peanut butter and cereal. She'd slept on a mattress on the floor with library books and crayons and a one-eared rabbit. And when she'd decided she couldn't do it anymore, she hadn't called the police. She hadn't gone to a neighbor. She'd walked 3 miles in the rain to a diner full of strangers and asked for directions to the orphanage. Because somewhere in her 7-year-old mind, she'd decided that the best thing she could do for her father was to disappear. Forge appeared in the doorway, rain dripping off his beard. He'd been circling the property. "Truck's gone. Neighbors say they haven't seen him in a week. Lady across the street said she's been leaving food on the porch when she remembers." He paused. "She also said she called CPS twice. Nobody came." Jace felt the words land in his gut like a fist. Nobody came. The system, the great machine that was supposed to catch falling children, had looked at this address and kept driving. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang 4 times. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was rough, half asleep. "Priest, it's Vandal. I need you to run a plate for me." A pause, the sound of a lighter clicking, an exhale. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involves a 7-year-old kid eating peanut butter alone in the dark for 4 days." Silence. Then, "Give me the name." "Eric Hartwell. Blackridge. Probably driving a work truck, older model. Check the shelters, check the hospitals, check anywhere a man goes when he's decided he's done." "Done how?" Jace looked at Lila. She was sitting on the couch now, her legs not long enough to reach the floor, the rabbit in her lap, her eyes fixed on the drawing she'd made, the one with 2 stick figures and the word home. "Done like he thinks his kid is better off without him." He hung up, turned to Wire. "Stay with her. Get her warm, get her fed. If CPS shows up, they don't come inside without me here." "Where are you going?" "To find her father before he does something he can't take back." Jace walked out into the rain. The cold hit his face, and he let it sting. Let it wake up whatever part of him had gone numb in that upstairs bedroom when he'd found a document that smelled like surrender and a pen with its cap already off. He mounted his bike. Forge was beside him, engine idling, visor up, waiting. "Where?" Forge asked. One word. That's all Curtis ever needed. "Old Monarch Mill. If a man in this town wants to disappear, that's where he goes." They rode into the dark. No streetlights past the bridge. Just the headlight beams cutting through the rain and the road unwinding like a black ribbon into nothing. The mill was 2 miles north of the rail yard, a sprawling skeleton of concrete and steel that hadn't produced anything in 11 years except shadows and the occasional body that the county coroner would list as exposure because it sounded better than the truth. Jace had been here before. When he was 19, he'd spent a winter sleeping on the 3rd floor because the shelters were full and the street was colder. He knew the building the way a wound knows the knife that made it. Every stairwell, every room, every place where the roof leaked and every place where it didn't. He killed his engine at the loading dock and listened. Rain on metal, wind through broken windows, and somewhere deep inside the building, a sound that didn't belong to the weather. A cough. He looked at Forge. Forge nodded. They went in. The ground floor was black. Jace pulled a flashlight from his saddlebag and swept it across the concrete. Graffiti, broken glass, a shopping cart on its side. The smell was concrete dust and rust and something animal, pigeons or rats or the memory of men who'd slept here when they had nowhere else. The cough came again. 2nd floor, east side. They climbed. The stairs were metal grating, their boots ringing with each step, the sound carrying up through the empty building like a heartbeat in a hollow chest. At the top of the stairwell, a corridor stretched into darkness. Doors on both sides, most of them missing. At the far end, a faint light. Not electric. A candle, or a lantern, or the glow of a phone screen in a room with no windows. Jace walked toward it, his shadow stretched long on the walls. The flashlight picked up details as he moved. A sleeping bag rolled against the wall, an empty water bottle, a pair of work gloves with the fingers worn through. The light was coming from the last room on the right. He stopped outside the door and looked in. A man sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Mid-30s, but he looked 50. Unshaven, hollow-cheeked, dark circles under eyes that stared at nothing. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, work boots, the same boots Jace had seen upstairs in the bedroom on Willow Creek Road, the same mud. A camping lantern sat beside him, its yellow glow making the shadows jump. In his lap, a manila folder, and in his right hand, a pen. The same document. He'd made a copy. Eric Hartwell looked up when the flashlight hit his face, and his expression wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was the flat, dead gaze of a man who'd already made his decision and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up with his heart.
"Who are you?" he said. His voice was thin, scraped out. Jace stepped into the room, his boots on the concrete, his leather cut visible in the lantern light, the Iron Wolves patch, the road captain flash, the name Vandal in white thread. "Your daughter sent me," he said. Eric's face changed. Not a lot. Just enough. A crack in the mask. A flinch at the corners of his mouth, like the word daughter was a blade and it had found the space between his ribs. "Lila," he whispered. She walked 3 miles in the rain to ask a room full of bikers how to get to the orphanage. Eric closed his eyes. His hand tightened on the pen. The manila folder crinkled in his lap. "She memorized the route," Jace continued. "Every turn, every landmark. She's been planning this, Eric. She's been getting ready to lose you because she thinks that's what you want. It's not what I... She's been alone for 4 days." The words hit the room like gunshots. Eric's head dropped.
His shoulders began to shake. The pen fell from his hand and rolled across the concrete, a small plastic sound in a vast, empty space. Jace didn't move, didn't soften his voice, didn't offer comfort, because comfort wasn't what this man needed. A man standing on the edge didn't need someone to hold his hand. He needed someone to tell him the truth so hard it knocked him back from the ledge. "You think you're saving her," Jace said. "You think if you sign that paper and walk away, she gets a better life, a real family, a house with food in the refrigerator and heat that works and someone who isn't..." He stopped. Swallowed. "Isn't broken." Eric looked up, tears on his face, cutting tracks through the dirt. "I know what you think," Jace said, "because I had a mother who thought the same thing. She signed the paper. She walked away. And I spent the next 10 years in a system that chewed me up and spit me out and taught me that the only person who was ever going to protect me was me." The lantern flickered. A gust of wind moved through the building, and somewhere above them a sheet of metal creaked and groaned. "Your daughter doesn't need a better father, Eric. She needs her father, the one she drew on the wall with crayons. The one she walks 3 miles in the rain for. Jace crouched until he was eye level with the man on the floor. You put your name on that paper, and you don't save her. You break something inside her that nobody, not a foster family, not a caseworker, not anyone, will ever be able to fix. Eric stared at him. The tears had stopped, but his eyes were red, raw, like wounds that had been reopened one too many times. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't take care of her. I lost the house. I lost the job. Margaret's gone. I can't even feed her. What am I supposed to? You're supposed to stand up. Eric blinked. Right now. You're supposed to stand up off this floor and walk out of this building and get in my truck and go see your daughter. Everything else, the house, the bills, the job, that's tomorrow. Tonight, you stand up. The silence stretched. Rain on the roof, wind in the walls, 2 men in a dark room in an abandoned mill, and between them a piece of paper that could erase a family. Eric reached for the folder. Jace's hand shot out and closed around his wrist. Not hard, not violent, but absolute. Don't, Jace said. Their eyes locked. Eric's chest heaved. His free hand trembled. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. A sound came out of him, but not a word. Something below language, something from the part of a man that hasn't spoken since childhood. And then, from somewhere downstairs, a sound that made both of them freeze. A child's voice, small and clear, and cutting through the dark like a blade of light. Daddy? Jace's head snapped toward the doorway. He hadn't heard the truck, hadn't heard footsteps, but the voice was there, rising through the stairwell, echoing off the concrete. Wire's voice followed, urgent. She got out of the truck. I couldn't stop her. She just ran. Boots on metal grating. Small boots. Fast. The sound of a 7-year-old girl running up a staircase in an abandoned building in the dark, toward a father she hadn't seen in 4 days, in a town that had stopped caring about either of them. Eric's face shattered. The pen lay on the floor. The folder lay open. And somewhere between the second floor and that doorway, a little girl was running through the dark with a 1-eared rabbit under her arm, and the only question left was whether the man on the floor would be standing when she got there. Jace released his wrist. Your call, Eric. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then silence. The terrible, held-breath silence of a child standing in a doorway, looking at her father on the floor of a place that smelled like concrete and rain and the end of everything. What she said next would either save them both or destroy them. But that's where we pick up in part 2. Lila stood in the doorway. The lantern light caught half her face, one brown eye, one wet cheek, the collar of the corduroy jacket dark with rain. The other half was shadow. She held the rabbit against her chest with both hands, its remaining ear bent against her chin, and she didn't move, didn't run to him, didn't cry. She just stood there looking at her father on the floor of an abandoned mill, and the expression on her face was the worst thing Jace Mercer had ever seen. Not fear, not sadness, recognition, like she'd always known this was where he'd be, like she'd been imagining this exact scene. Her father in the dark, on the ground, giving up, for months. Like finding him here didn't surprise her at all, and that was the thing that could break your heart if you let it. Eric's mouth was open. No sound came out. His hands lay flat on the concrete beside the manila folder, and his fingers were spread wide, pressing into the floor like he was trying to hold on to something solid because everything else had turned to smoke. Daddy, Lila said again. Not a question this time. A statement. I see you. I found you. I know what you're doing. Baby? Eric's voice cracked on the word. He tried to stand and couldn't. His legs wouldn't cooperate. Months of sleeping on concrete and eating nothing and carrying a grief so heavy it had hollowed him out. His body had simply stopped obeying. He got halfway up and his knee buckled and he went back down, one hand catching the wall, his palms scraping the rough surface. Jace didn't help him. That was deliberate, because some things a man has to do alone or they don't count. Eric tried again. This time he made it. Leaning against the wall, his chest heaving, his flannel shirt hanging off shoulders that had lost 30 pounds since April. He looked at his daughter across 8 feet of dirty concrete, and the space between them felt like a canyon. Lila took one step into the room, then another. Her shoes, small white sneakers, The soles caked with mud from the walk and the yard and now the mill floor made almost no sound. She stopped 3 feet from her father, close enough to touch. She didn't touch. "You were going to sign the paper," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was flat, factual. The way you'd say the sky is gray or the milk is gone. Eric flinched like she'd hit him. "How do you—" "I found the first one, in the box by your bed. I read it." She paused. I had to look up some of the words. Jace felt the air leave his lungs. A 7-year-old, alone in an empty house, sounding out the legal language of her own abandonment by flashlight, looking up custody and relinquish and ward of the state because nobody was there to explain them to her. Because the one person who should have been there was sleeping on the floor of a dead factory, rehearsing his own disappearance. Eric slid down the wall until he was sitting again. His hands covered his face. The sound he made wasn't crying. It was something underneath crying, something structural, like a beam giving way inside a building that had been failing for months and had finally reached the point where the whole thing was going to come down. Lila watched him. And then she did something that made Jace's throat close. She set the rabbit on the floor, carefully, gently, the way you set down something precious when you need both hands free for something harder. Then she walked the last 3 feet, sat down on the concrete beside her father, and leaned her head against his arm. She didn't say anything. Didn't say it was okay. Didn't say she forgave him. She just pressed her small body against his side and sat there in the dark, in the cold, in a building that smelled like rust and failure and rain. Eric's hands came down from his face. He looked at the top of her head. His right arm moved, shaking, uncertain, and settled around her shoulders. His chin dropped to her hair, and he held on like a man gripping the edge of a cliff with his fingernails. Jace turned and walked out of the room. He made it to the stairwell before his hands started shaking. He braced them against the railing and breathed. 3 counts in, 4 counts out, the way the VA counselor had taught him 16 years ago, back when he still went to the VA, back before he'd decided the waiting room full of broken men was just a mirror he couldn't stand looking into. Wire was at the bottom of the stairs, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His silver tooth caught the flashlight's edge. "She just took off," Wire said. "I turned around to check the road and she was gone. Kid's fast. Kid's been taking care of herself for months. Fast is the least of what she is. How bad is it up there?" Jace didn't answer right away. He pulled a cigarette from the pack in his cut pocket, put it between his lips, and lit it. The flame jumped in the dark. The first drag filled his chest with heat and poison and the kind of calm that wasn't calm at all but felt close enough. "He's done," Jace said. "Or he thinks he is. Lost the wife in March. Job in April. House? I don't even know when. He's been sleeping here, living off nothing. And the whole time, that kid's been in an empty house by herself, reading her own custody surrender papers by flashlight." Wire's jaw tightened. The tremor in his right hand, the one that never stopped, the one that had started the night a mortar round hit the building next to his position in Fallujah and turned 3 of his friends into something he still saw when he closed his eyes, picked up speed. "CPS? Forge says the neighbor called twice. Nobody came." "Of course nobody came. It's Blackridge. Nobody comes to Blackridge for anything." Jace smoked. The cherry glowed in the dark stairwell, a small orange eye. "He can't stay here," Wire said. "And the kid can't go back to that house. So what are we doing?" "I don't know yet." "That's not like you." "No, it isn't." They stood in silence. Above them, through the layers of concrete and steel, no sound. Whatever was happening in that room between a father and daughter, that belonged to them, for now. Jace's phone buzzed. He pulled it out. A text from Priest, Marcus Priest Donnelly, the club's intelligence officer, a former Army CID investigator who'd lost his career after refusing to bury a report on a colonel who deserved burying. The text was short. "Found the truck. County Road 14 parked behind the old feed store. He's been using it as a second camp. Personal effects inside. Also, heads up. CPS has an open file. Caseworker named Vivian Holt. She's aggressive. If she finds out the kid's been alone, she won't wait for paperwork." Jace read the message twice. The cigarette burned between his fingers, ash falling to the floor. "Problem?" Wire asked. "CPS has a file open. Active caseworker." which means if the girl turns up in the system, at a hospital, at school, at a shelter, they take her, and Eric goes from negligent to criminal. Wire exhaled. So we're on a clock. We've been on a clock since she walked into the diner. Jace dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. He pulled up Forge's number and called. Yeah. Forge's voice deep and level. Where are you? Front of the building, checking the perimeter. Get in touch with Ratchet. I need the shop open tonight. And call Mama Jean. Tell her I need a room, no questions, at least a week, heated, clean, and if she's got anything in the kitchen, bring it. For the kid? For both of them. Done. Jace hung up and looked at Wire. We're bringing them to the clubhouse, just for tonight. Tomorrow I figure out the rest. The rest being what? Jobs? Housing? Keeping a man alive who doesn't want to be? The rest being whatever it takes to keep that little girl from ever having to memorize another route to a place she shouldn't have to go. Wire studied him. The flashlight cast sharp shadows across his thin face, deepening the hollows under his cheekbones, the scar along his hairline from the shrapnel that had almost taken his left eye. This is personal for you, Wire said, not a question. Don't. I'm not judging. I'm saying it because someone has to. You've got history with this exact situation, and history makes people stupid. I said don't, and I heard you, but I'm your brother before I'm your subordinate, so I'll say what I need to say. Wire's voice dropped. You can't save yourself by saving this kid, Jace. That's not how it works. The words hung in the stairwell like smoke. Jace didn't respond. He turned and started back up the stairs, his boots ringing on the metal, each step deliberate, heavy. The sound of a man walking toward something he knew was going to cost him, and going anyway. He found them in the same position. Eric on the floor, Lila against his side, neither of them speaking. The manila folder lay open beside them, the document visible, the signature line still blank. The pen was on the floor 4 feet away, where it had rolled. Eric. The man looked up. His eyes were red but dry. Something had shifted in them. Not hope, not yet. But the absence of the dead certainty that had been there before. A crack in the wall. A space where something else could grow or could collapse further, depending on what happened next. I've got a place you can stay tonight, Jace said. Both of you. It's warm. There's food. I can't. I'm not asking. Eric stared at him. Jace held the gaze. 2 men measuring each other across the gulf between ruin and refusal. Between giving up and being told that giving up wasn't an option. I don't know you, Eric said. No. I don't know why you're doing this. No. So why should I? Because your daughter walked 3 miles in the rain to ask me for directions, and I'm standing in a building where men come to die. Those are the 2 facts you need. Everything else is noise. Eric looked at Lila. She looked back at him with those brown eyes, calm, steady, ancient in a face that still had baby fat on the cheekbones. I'm hungry, Daddy, she said. 2 words, the simplest sentence in the world. And they did what Jace's arguments couldn't. They cut through the shame, the guilt, the paralysis, all of it, and hit the one nerve that still worked, the one thing a broken father could still hear above the roar of his own failure. His daughter was hungry. Eric stood up. It took him a long time. He leaned on the wall and straightened, his knees shaking, his jaw set. He looked down at the folder on the floor, looked at the document, looked at the blank signature line. Then he stepped on it, not dramatically, not with rage. He just put his boot on it and walked toward the door, and the paper crumpled under his weight like it had never mattered at all. Lila picked up her rabbit and followed. The ride back to the Iron Wolves clubhouse took 12 minutes through empty streets. Jace led on his bike, the Road King's headlight punching through the rain. Forge rode behind him. Wire drove the truck with Eric in the passenger seat and Lila between them, her head against her father's arm, her eyes half closed, the rabbit's remaining ear brushing the dashboard. The clubhouse sat behind a chain-link fence on a half-acre lot off Industrial Way. A converted auto repair shop with a corrugated steel roof and a hand-painted sign over the door that read, Iron Wolves MC. A row of bikes out front. A security light that buzzed and swayed in the wind. Inside, it smelled like motor oil, coffee, leather, and the chemical tang of the cleaning solution Mama Jean used on the floor every Thursday, whether it needed it or not. Mama Jean Kessler was 63, 4'11", built like a fire hydrant, and was not an official member of the Iron Wolves because she had no interest in riding a motorcycle or attending meetings. What she was, the only thing she was, and the only thing she needed to be, was the woman who kept the clubhouse from descending into the kind of squalor that men left alone will inevitably create. She cooked, she cleaned, she maintained a medical kit that would rival a small urgent care clinic. And she had been Jace Mercer's foster mother for 11 months when he was 12 years old, which made her the closest thing to a parent he'd ever had, which was a fact neither of them mentioned aloud because some things are more real when you don't say them. She was waiting at the door when the truck pulled in, arms crossed, gray hair pulled back, a look on her face that could have cured leather. "Kitchen's warm," she said, stepping aside. "I made soup." Lila walked in and stopped in the center of the room. She looked around at the concrete floor, the mismatched furniture, the flag on the wall, the row of hooks where cuts hung when their owners were working in the shop. Her eyes settled on a framed photograph above the bar, a group shot of the chapter taken years ago. 15 men standing in front of their bikes, squinting into the sun. "This is where you live?" she asked Jace. "Some of us." "It smells like a garage." "That's because it is a garage." "Oh." She considered this. "I like garages." Mama Jean took her by the hand without ceremony and led her to the kitchen. Eric stood in the doorway, wet, shaking, looking at the room like a man who'd washed ashore and couldn't quite believe the ground was solid. Jace caught his arm. "Sit down, eat, don't think past tonight." Eric sat. He ate a bowl of soup and 2 slices of bread and drank 3 glasses of water, and his hands trembled so badly that he spilled twice and Mama Jean refilled his glass without looking at him, giving him the dignity of not being watched while he fell apart. Lila ate in the kitchen with her rabbit on the table beside her plate. She ate slowly, deliberately, the way a child eats when she's been hungry long enough that she's learned not to eat too fast because her stomach will rebel. Mama Jean sat across from her and said nothing, just watched. And in the watching, something settled in the old woman's face, a tightness around the mouth, a brightness in the eyes, that Jace recognized as the look she got before she went to war. He stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. He lit another cigarette and leaned against the brick wall, the cold seeping through his leather into his shoulders. Forge appeared beside him, silent as always, a cup of black coffee in one hand. "I called Ratchet," Forge said. "Shop's open at 6. He says he can look at Hartwell's truck tomorrow, see if it's worth fixing." Jace nodded. "Also called Henderson." Forge paused. This was a longer sentence than Curtis usually committed to, and the length of it signaled weight. "Told him the situation." Luther Henderson. Retired attorney. Former Iron Wolves member until a heart attack at 54 convinced him to park the bike and take up fishing. He still did legal work for the club. Probation hearings, traffic violations, the occasional assault charge that needed to disappear quietly. He was 70 now, with a white beard and hands that still moved with the precision of a man who'd spent 30 years making opposing counsel regret walking into court. And? He says the CPS caseworker, Holt, she's been trying to build a removal case for 6 weeks. Neighbor complaints, wellness check that nobody followed up on, school truancy reports. She's got enough for an emergency removal order if she finds the kid in any situation she can classify as imminent danger. Forge took a sip of coffee. An empty house with no heat, no food, and no parent qualifies. The house isn't where Lila is right now. No, but if Holt finds out the father abandoned her for 4 days, it doesn't matter where the kid is. She files. A judge signs. They come and take her. Jace's cigarette had burned down to the filter. He dropped it and ground it out with his heel. When does Holt usually move? Henderson says Monday. She works county hours. It's Saturday night. That gives us 36 hours. To do what? Jace was quiet for a long moment. The drizzle collected on his face. A bead of water ran down the scar on his cheek and fell from his jaw. To build a case that Eric Hartwell is a fit father in a stable situation. Housing, employment, support system. Something on paper that looks solid enough to make a judge hesitate. Forge looked at him. In 36 hours. You got a better idea? I'm just making sure you hear what you're saying. I hear it. Because this isn't fixing a transmission, Jace. This is a legal fight. Against the county. With a caseworker who's already building momentum. And we're a motorcycle club with a reputation that most judges in Sullivan County would call unfavorable on a good day. I know what we are. Do you? Because right now you're acting like a man who thinks he can punch his way through a system that was designed to be punch-proof. Jace turned to look at Forge. The bigger man met his eyes and didn't look away. That was the thing about Curtis. He never flinched. Not when the conversation was easy, and not when it was the kind of hard that could end a friendship if you weren't careful. I spent 10 years in that system, Jace said, his voice low. Group homes, foster placements that lasted 2 months before somebody decided I was too angry, too quiet, too something. I aged out at 18 with a garbage bag full of clothes and a social security number and nothing else. Nobody fought for me. Nobody showed up. Nobody looked at a skinny kid sleeping in a state-issued bed and said, "This is wrong." He paused. I'm not going to stand here and watch it happen to her. Forge held his gaze, then nodded. Slowly. Once. Then we do it right, Forge said. Not loud, not with muscle. We do it with paper and people and a plan that doesn't fall apart the second someone asks questions we don't want to answer. Agreed. And you need to understand something. Forge's voice dropped to a register that meant this was the thing that mattered most. If CPS shows up and we've been harboring a child and a father who's under investigation for neglect, we don't look like protectors. We look like accessories. Every man in this club has a record, some worse than others. This caseworker gets a whiff of where Lila is, and the story stops being father needs help and starts being biker gang kidnaps neglected child, and that story doesn't end well for anyone. The weight of it settled on Jace's shoulders, because Forge was right. Forge was always right. That was why he was Forge, because he hammered the truth into shape on an anvil and handed it to you still hot. From inside the clubhouse, a sound. Lila laughing, something Mama Jean had said. The laugh was high and bright and startling, like a bird singing in a building everyone thought was empty. Jace listened to it. Let it sit in his chest. Let it hurt. 36 hours, he said. We get Henderson to file a counter petition. We find Eric a job, even temp work, even day labor, anything that shows income. We get him into the apartment above Ratchet's shop, the one that's been empty since Donnie moved out. That gives us an address. Mama Jean stays with Lila tomorrow while Eric and I sit down with Henderson and prep. And if Holt comes before we're ready? Then I look her in the eye and explain that a man asked for help, and we gave it. That's not a crime. It's not. But she won't care about what's not a crime. She'll care about what she can use. Jace's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. Another text from Priest. One more thing. The neighbor, the one who called CPS, she also filed a police report. Last Wednesday. Welfare check request. Blackridge PD logged it, but didn't respond. If Holt pulls that report, she's got a documented 4-day window of an unattended minor and a law enforcement failure she can use as leverage to demand immediate removal. Jace read it again, felt the ground shift under him like a floor giving way. A police report. Filed, logged, sitting in a system that could be accessed by anyone with a badge or a county ID at any time. A ticking clock attached to a bomb they couldn't see and couldn't defuse and couldn't outrun. He looked at Forge. We're not on 36 hours. How long? I don't know. Could be Monday. Could be tomorrow morning. The neighbor filed a police report on Wednesday. If anyone at the county pulls it, they come tonight. They come tonight. Inside the clubhouse, Lila laughed again. Mama Jean's voice followed, low and warm, the sound of a woman who had made a career out of holding damaged things together with nothing but her hands and her refusal to quit. Jace stood very still. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean and sharp, and it smelled like wet asphalt and motor oil and the particular brand of dread that comes when you've committed to a fight and just realized the fight is bigger than you thought. Forge drained his coffee and set the cup on the windowsill. I'll call Henderson now. Get him out of bed. Tell him it's an emergency. He'll say it's always an emergency. Tell him this time it actually is. Forge went inside.
Jace stayed. Alone in the dark, on a patch of wet gravel behind a motorcycle clubhouse in a dying town, with the weight of a document he'd taken from a dead man's bedroom pressing against his chest through the lining of his jacket.
He reached into his pocket and pulled it out. The original. The voluntary surrender of parental rights with Eric Hartwell's name on it, and Lila Grace Hartwell's name on it, and the blank signature line that represented the exact moment a family would stop existing. He looked at it for a long time. Then he tore it in half, tore the halves into quarters, tore the quarters into pieces no bigger than a thumbnail. He held the pieces in his fist for a moment, feeling the paper's edge against his palm, and then he opened his hand and let the wind take them. They scattered across the gravel lot like confetti at a funeral, white fragments tumbling into the dark, disappearing into puddles and gutters and the spaces between things, and in 10 seconds they were gone, and the document no longer existed in any form, and that was at least one thing that couldn't be used against anyone. But as the last piece vanished, his phone lit up one more time. Not a text, a voicemail, from a number he didn't recognize. He pressed play and held the phone to his ear. A woman's voice, clipped, professional. Cold in the way that only bureaucrats and surgeons could be cold. Not cruel, just stripped of everything that might slow down the machinery. Mr. Mercer, this is Vivian Holt, Sullivan County Child Protective Services. I've been informed that you may be in contact with a minor child named Lila Hartwell, who is the subject of an active welfare investigation. I need to speak with you urgently. If the child is in your care or in the care of any member of your organization, you are required by law to make her available for an interview. I will be at the Iron Wolves Clubhouse at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Please have the child present. The voicemail ended. The screen went dark. Jace lowered the phone. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the lot, the last piece of torn paper tumbled across the gravel and caught on the chain-link fence, trembling there like a small white flag. 7 a.m. That wasn't 36 hours. That wasn't even 12. That was 9. And somewhere inside the building behind him, a little girl was laughing over a bowl of soup, and a father was trying to remember what it felt like to be whole, and neither of them knew that in 9 hours, someone was coming to take everything apart. Jace put the phone in his pocket, walked inside, closed the door. The lock turned with a sound like a round being chambered. Jace didn't sleep. He sat in the folding chair beside the door of the back room where Eric and Lila had been put for the night. A converted storage space with a cot, a space heater, and a stack of wool blankets that Mama Jean had pulled from a closet that smelled like cedar and motor oil. Lila slept on the cot with the rabbit tucked under her chin. Eric sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, his eyes open, watching his daughter breathe. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying. At 3:47 a.m., Jace's phone buzzed. Henderson. I'm up, the old lawyer said, his voice carrying the rasp of a man who'd been awake for hours reviewing things he didn't like. And you've got a problem worse than you think. Talk. Vivian Holt isn't just a caseworker. She's the new head of emergency placements for Sullivan County, appointed 6 months ago after a child death in the Greystone District, a 4-year-old in a meth house that CPS had been monitoring for 8 months without intervening. The county got sued. The state came down on them. Holt was brought in specifically to demonstrate that the new administration removes children faster and asks questions later. She's built her entire reputation on aggressive intervention. Jace stared at the wall. The space heater clicked and hummed. What does that mean for us? It means she's not coming to ask questions. She's coming to take the girl. She'll have the paperwork ready. Probably already has a judge's signature on standby. Emergency removal orders in Sullivan County require a magistrate's approval, and the duty magistrate on weekends is Harold Cope, who has signed every removal order Holt has put in front of him for the past 4 months. 37 out of 37. So it's done before it starts. If you play it straight, yes. She walks in, determines the child is in the care of non-relatives with criminal records, documents the father's 4-day absence, and exercises the emergency removal. Lila goes into temporary foster placement within hours. Eric gets a hearing in 72 hours, but by then the child is already in the system, and the burden of proof shifts to him to demonstrate he's fit, which, given his current situation, he can't. Not without employment, housing, and a documented support structure, and not with a 4-day gap on record. Jace was quiet. In the room behind him, Lila shifted on the cot. A small sound. The creak of old springs, the whisper of a blanket being pulled tighter. Eric's hand moved to her back, steadying her in her sleep the way you steady a candle in a draft. "Give me something, Luther." "I'm trying. There's a provision, Section 2151, 419 of the Ohio Revised Code, that allows a court to consider reasonable efforts made by a parent to remedy the conditions that led to the removal petition. If we can demonstrate that Eric voluntarily sought help, that he's in stable temporary housing, that there's a support network in place, and that the child is safe and cared for, we can argue that removal is unnecessary because the conditions have already been addressed. That's what I was planning: job, housing, support, all before she shows up. I know, and it might work against a reasonable caseworker, but Holt isn't reasonable. She's political. She's building a record of decisive action. Every removal she executes is another line on her resume. Keeping a child with a father she's already flagged as negligent in a biker clubhouse doesn't serve her narrative. So what does? Henderson paused. The kind of pause that meant the next words were going to hurt. You need a third party, someone with institutional credibility who can stand between Holt and the child and say, "I'm supervising this situation," a licensed social worker, a family advocate, someone whose credentials make Holt's removal argument look like overreach. And where do I find a licensed social worker at 4 in the morning in Black Ridge, Ohio? That's your problem. I'm your lawyer, not your miracle worker. But I'll tell you this, if Holt walks in at 7 and all she sees is a bunch of bikers and a traumatized father, you'll lose the girl before breakfast. Henderson hung up. Jace lowered the phone and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until he saw static. 4 hours. He needed a credentialed advocate, stable housing, proof of employment, and a legal strategy strong enough to stop a county bureaucrat with a 100% approval rate on removal orders. In 4 hours. In a town where the only things open at this hour were the gas station on Route 9 and the county jail. He stood, his knees cracked, his lower back ached, the old injury from the wreck on Show 71, the one that the VA said was service-connected and then spent 3 years denying benefits for. He walked to the main room where Forge was asleep on the couch, still in his boots, one arm draped over his eyes. "Curtis?" Forge was awake in a breath, no transition, asleep to alert in one beat, the way combat veterans wake, fully conscious, already scanning for threat. "Henderson says we need a licensed advocate, someone with credentials who can be here by 7. Forge sat up, rubbed his face. "I know someone." "Who?" "My sister." Jace blinked. In 12 years of riding together, Curtis Forge Williams had mentioned his sister exactly twice, once after a funeral, once after a bottle of bourbon. Both times the subject had been closed as quickly as it had been opened, sealed with the particular silence Curtis used when a topic was load-bearing and not to be tested. "Rachel," Forge said. "She's a licensed clinical social worker, MSW from Ohio State. She works for a family services nonprofit in Columbus. Columbus is 2 hours away. Hour and a half if she drives the way she drives. Will she come?" Forge looked at him. Something complicated moved behind his eyes. Not reluctance exactly, but something adjacent. The kind of expression a man wears when he's about to open a door he's kept locked for good reason. "She'll come. But you need to know something first." Jace waited. "Rachel doesn't approve of the club. Hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Last time we talked, she told me I was wasting my life playing outlaw with men who were too damaged to function in the real world." He paused. "She wasn't entirely wrong. Can you get her here?" "I can try. But she's going to walk in here and see everything Holt is going to see. Criminal records, leather cuts, a kid in a building that doesn't have a license to house minors, and she's going to have to decide if she's willing to stake her professional reputation on us. That's a big ask." "It's the only ask we've got." Forge pulled out his phone, stared at the screen for a long moment. The last text in his conversation with his sister was dated 3 years ago. 4 words, "Don't call me again." He dialed. It rang 7 times. Jace counted. On the 8th ring, a voice picked up, tired, guarded, the voice of a woman who'd seen the caller ID and debated not answering. Curtis. Rachel. Silence. The kind that has texture. 3 years of it compressed into a phone line at 4 in the morning. There's a little girl, Forge said, 7 years old. She's in our clubhouse right now because her father almost gave her up, and nobody else in this town lifted a finger. CPS is coming at 7 a.m. with a removal order, and the only thing standing between this kid and the foster system is someone with the right letters after their name who's willing to show up and say she's supervised. Silence again. Longer this time. Curtis, I can't. I know what you can't. I know what I am to you. I know what the club is to you. I'm not asking you to approve of any of it. I'm asking you to drive to Black Ridge and stand in a room and be the person you trained to be. Not for me, for her. You're asking me to put my license on the line for a situation I haven't assessed. I'm asking you to assess it. Come here. Look at it. If it's wrong, if the kid's in danger, if the father's unfit, say so. I'll step aside. But if what you see is a man who needs help and a child who needs her father and a system that's about to destroy both of them because it's easier than fixing anything, then I'm asking you to do what you always said people like me never do. What's that? The right thing. Forge hung up. He didn't wait for an answer. He set the phone on the arm of the couch and looked at Jace. Either she comes or she doesn't. Nothing more I can do. Jace nodded. Neither of them mentioned the 3 years. Neither of them mentioned the 4 words on the screen. Some wounds stay open because closing them would require admitting they exist. The next 2 hours moved like concrete drying. Jace called in every favor the Iron Wolves had left. Ratchet, the club's mechanic, a wiry ex-Navy machinist's mate with oil permanently embedded in his fingerprints, opened the apartment above his shop by 5 a.m. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that worked if you hit the pipe twice. He swept the floor, changed the sheets, stocked the refrigerator with groceries from the all-night gas station, milk, eggs, bread, peanut butter, cereal. Not much. Enough to fill a shelf and look like someone lived there. Mama Jean washed Lila's clothes, dried them on the radiator, pressed the corduroy jacket with an iron that looked older than the building. She braided the girl's hair at 6 a.m., while Lila sat on a stool in the kitchen eating toast with butter, the rabbit on her lap, her feet swinging above the floor. "You have nice hair," Mama Jean said. "My mom used to braid it." Mama Jean's hands paused, one beat, then they continued, steady, practiced, as if the words hadn't landed like a grenade in the middle of a quiet kitchen. "She taught you how?" "No, she died before she could." Lila took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed. "I watched videos on the internet, but my arms aren't long enough to do the back." Mama Jean tied the braid with a band from her own wrist and said nothing. But when Lila hopped off the stool and walked away, the old woman stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface and her head down, and she stayed that way for a long time. Eric was in the shop bay, sitting on an overturned milk crate, wearing a clean flannel that Wire had pulled from the donation box. His hands hung between his knees. He stared at the floor. The oil-stained concrete, the tool marks, the bolts and washers that had rolled into the cracks and been forgotten. He looked like a man who'd been put through a machine and come out the other side in the right shape, but with something essential missing. Jace sat across from him on another crate. 2 men in a garage at 5:30 in the morning, the fluorescent light humming above them, a space heater blowing warm air that smelled like dust. "Holt's coming at 7, Jace said. Eric looked up. "She's a CPS caseworker. She knows about Lila. She knows you haven't been home. She's coming with paperwork. To take her. To try." Eric's hands closed into fists. Not anger, something beyond anger. The white-knuckled grip of a man holding on to the edge of himself. "I can't stop her. I've got nothing. No lawyer, no job, no house. I'm sitting in a biker garage wearing someone else's shirt." His voice cracked. "What am I supposed to say to her? That I'm a good father? Look at me." "I am looking at you." "Then you see what she's going to see." "What I see is a man who lost his wife, lost his job, lost his home, and didn't put a bottle in his hand or a needle in his arm. What I see is a man who fed his kid before he fed himself, who slept on factory floors so she could have the bed, who was signing that paper not because he wanted to, but because he loved her enough to think she deserved better. Jace leaned forward. That's what I see. And that's what I'm going to make sure Holt sees. How? We've got a lawyer, Luther Henderson. He's been doing this for 30 years. We've got housing, Ratchet's apartment, upstairs, ready today. We've got me and my guys vouching that you came to us for help voluntarily. And we've got... He checked his phone. No message from Forge. We might have a licensed social worker. Might? Working on it. Eric shook his head. The despair in his face wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, thorough, the kind that had been building for months and had settled into every line and hollow like sediment in a river. You don't know what she's going to say. This woman, Holt. She's not going to care about any of that. She's going to see a man who left his 7-year-old daughter alone for 4 days. And she's going to be right. She's going to be right about the facts. She's going to be wrong about what they mean. Facts are all that matters in a courtroom. We're not in a courtroom yet. That's the point. At 6:22 a.m., headlights swept across the front of the clubhouse. Jay stood and walked to the window. A silver Honda Accord newer model pulled into the lot between the row of Harleys. The engine cut. The driver's door opened. Rachel Williams stepped out. Tall, almost as tall as her brother. Dark skin, close-cropped natural hair, a wool coat over professional clothes. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the particular efficiency of a woman who'd driven 90 minutes in the dark and had no intention of wasting time now that she'd arrived. Forge was at the door before she reached it. They stood facing each other in the cold morning air, brother and sister, 3 years of silence between them, the kind of distance that couldn't be measured in miles. You look tired, Rachel said. You look pissed. I drove here from Columbus at 4 a.m. for a man I haven't spoken to since he chose this. She gestured at the clubhouse, the bikes, the cut on his shoulders. Over his family. So yes, pissed is a fair description. You came. I came for the girl, not for you. Where is she? Forge led her inside. Jace intercepted them in the main room. He extended his hand. Jace Mercer, road captain. Rachel looked at his hand. Looked at his cut, looked at the scar on his face and the calluses on his knuckles and the dark circles under his eyes. She shook his hand with a grip that was firm, brief, and transactional. Rachel Williams, LISW. Before I do anything, I need to see the child, speak with the father, and assess the environment, separately, alone. If at any point I determine this child is not safe, I will contact CPS myself and facilitate the removal. I'm not here to obstruct a legitimate intervention. I'm here to determine if one is necessary. Are those terms acceptable? Yes. Where's the child? Kitchen. Rachel walked past him without another word. Her briefcase hit the doorframe as she turned the corner. She didn't adjust her path. The briefcase scraped the wood and kept moving. A woman who walked through obstacles, not around them. Jace looked at Forge. She always like this? She's being polite. You should see her in court. They waited. Jace in the main room, pacing. Forge on the couch, still, his hands on his knees, the only sign of tension a muscle jumping in his jaw. Wire at the door, keeping watch. Mama Jean in the hallway, her arms crossed, her eyes moving between the kitchen door and the clock on the wall. 18 minutes. Rachel was in the kitchen with Lila for 18 minutes. The door was closed. No sound came through it except once, the faint high note of Lila's laugh, and then Rachel's voice, low and warm and completely different from the clinical edge she'd used in the main room. Then she spoke with Eric. That took longer. 26 minutes. When the door opened, Eric's eyes were red and Rachel's face was unreadable. The professional mask of a woman who'd been trained to hold other people's pain without letting it change the shape of her decisions. She walked into the main room and looked at Jace. The child is healthy, alert, emotionally regulated, and bonded to her father. The father is experiencing acute grief complicated by financial crisis and social isolation. He is not impaired, he is not abusive, he is not neglectful by disposition. He's overwhelmed by circumstance. She set her briefcase on the bar. I'll make a formal assessment report. I'll be here when Holt arrives. And I'll recommend supervised family preservation over removal. Jace exhaled, felt something loosen in his chest. But, Rachel held up one finger. I need to see the housing. Now. Before 7. If that apartment isn't clean, functional, and equipped for a child, my recommendation changes. It's ready. Then show me. They drove to Ratchet's shop. Rachel inspected the apartment the way a surgeon inspects an operating room. Every surface, every outlet, every window lock, the water temperature, the stove, the smoke detector. She found a loose railing on the staircase and told Jace to fix it before noon. She found cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink without a child safety lock and told him to move them. She wrote notes on a legal pad in handwriting so precise it looked printed. "It'll do?" she said. "Barely, but it'll do." They drove back to the clubhouse. It was 6:48 a.m. 12 minutes. Jace gathered everyone in the main room. Wire, Forge, Mama Jean, Eric, Rachel. Lila was in the back room with her rabbit and her library books. The door cracked open so she could be heard but not seen. "When Holt gets here," Jace said, "Rachel does the talking. Eric, you stay calm. Answer what she asks. Don't volunteer anything she doesn't ask for. Don't apologize. It sounds like an admission. Luther Henderson is on standby by phone if we need legal intervention." Eric nodded. His face was pale, but set. The look of a man who'd been handed a weapon he wasn't sure he knew how to use, but was going to hold it anyway. "Forge, Wire, you stay visible, but quiet. No cuts." Wire blinked. "You want us to take off our cuts?" "I want Holt to see concerned community members, not a motorcycle club. Just for the meeting. Cuts go back on the second she leaves." Wire looked at Forge. Forge looked at Jace. A moment passed. Heavy, weighted. Asking a patched member to remove his cut was asking him to remove his identity. It was the club equivalent of asking a soldier to take off his uniform before a battle. It wasn't done lightly. It wasn't done at all, usually. "For the kid," Forge said. He reached up and unclipped his cut, folded it with the care of a man handling a flag, set it on the bar. Wire did the same. His hands trembled, the Fallujah tremor, but the fold was clean. Jace looked at his own cut. Iron Wolves MC, road captain, vandal, 12 years of his life stitched into leather and thread. He unclipped it, felt the weight leave his shoulders and something cold rush in to fill the space. He folded it, set it on the bar beside the others. 3 cuts in a row. 3 identities set aside. 3 men standing in a room in flannel and thermals, looking like exactly what Holt needed them to look like. Ordinary people who gave a damn. At 6:56 a.m., Mama Jean looked out the window. "Car coming." A white county sedan pulled into the lot. Government plates. The engine idled for a moment, then cut. The driver's door opened. Vivian Holt was not what Jace had expected. She was small, 5'4" maybe, in low heels. Mid-40s. Short blonde hair. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a county ID badge and carried a manila folder that was thicker than Jace wanted it to be. Her face was composed, professional, and carried the particular blankness of a woman who had learned to detach from the emotional content of her work, because feeling it would make it impossible. She didn't knock. She walked in. Her eyes swept the room in 2 seconds flat. The men, the woman, the bar, the shop bay visible through the open door, the row of leather cuts folded on the bar. She saw them. Her gaze lingered on the patches for exactly 1 beat. And in that beat, Jace watched her categorize everything she needed to categorize. "Mr. Mercer." Not a question. "Miss Holt." "Where is Lila Hartwell?" "She's here. She's safe." "I'll determine that." Holt looked at Eric. "Mr. Hartwell, I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." Eric opened his mouth. Rachel stepped forward. "Ms. Holt." "I'm Rachel Williams, licensed independent social worker. I've been retained as a family advocate for the Hartwell family. I've completed an initial assessment this morning, and I have a report I'd like to share with you before any action is taken." Holt's eyes moved to Rachel. Something shifted. Not surprise exactly, but recalculation. The presence of a credentialed professional changed the geometry of the room, and Holt was smart enough to know it. "When were you retained?" "This morning." "This morning at..." She checked her watch. 7 a.m. on a Sunday. "I was contacted by a concerned party
and drove from Columbus. The urgency of the situation warranted an immediate response. The concerned party being my client's support network. Holt's gaze returned to the cuts on the bar. Folded. Visible. A message she was reading perfectly. I see. She opened her folder. Mr. Hartwell, your daughter was reported as unattended in her residence for a period of at least 4 days. A welfare check was requested by a neighbor. Blackridge Police logged the request but did not respond. Your home has been documented as having no heat, no functioning utilities, and insufficient food stores for a minor child. She looked up. Where were you during this period? Eric swallowed. Rachel touched his arm. A small gesture, barely visible, but enough. I was not at the residence, Eric said. His voice was thin but steady. I was experiencing a personal crisis following the death of my wife and the loss of my employment. I made the wrong decision. I recognize that. You left a 7-year-old alone. Yes. For 4 days. Yes. And during that time, your daughter walked 3 miles to a roadside establishment frequented by members of a motorcycle organization, where she requested directions to a county orphanage. The room was silent. Jace felt the silence like a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, filling his lungs. Yes, Eric said. Holt wrote something in her folder. Her pen moved with the mechanical precision of a woman who had done this hundreds of times. Then she looked up. I have an emergency removal order signed by Magistrate Cope. Given the documented conditions, I'm prepared to execute it immediately. Rachel stepped forward. Ms. Holt, under Section 2151.419, the county is required to make reasonable efforts to preserve the family unit before pursuing removal. In the 12 hours since Mr. Hartwell's situation came to the attention of his support network, he has voluntarily engaged with the following. He has secured temporary housing at a documented address with utilities and provisions. He has retained legal counsel. He has retained a licensed social worker for ongoing assessment and advocacy. And his daughter is currently clean, fed, rested, and in stable care. She handed Holt a document, her assessment report, printed 20 minutes ago on the clubhouse's ancient inkjet printer. Mr. Hartwell is not a negligent parent. He is a grieving parent who experienced a crisis and made decisions born of despair, not indifference. Removing his daughter will not protect her. It will traumatize a child who has already lost her mother, who has already been functionally separated from her father, and who walked 3 miles in the rain not to escape her home, but to preserve her father's right to let her go. Rachel's voice didn't waver. That child chose her father. The question before you is whether the county will honor that choice or override it. Holt read the assessment. Every page. Her face betrayed nothing. Then she closed the folder. Miss Williams, I respect your credentials and your assessment, but I've reviewed the police report, the neighbor statements, and the conditions documented at the Willow Creek residence. I also note that this child spent the night in a facility owned by a motorcycle organization whose members include individuals with multiple felony convictions. Her eyes found Jace. Held. The state's obligation is to the child's safety, not to her preferences. She reached into her folder and produced a second document, the removal order, signed, stamped, ready. I'd like to see Lila now. The room froze. Every molecule of air stopped moving. Jace felt it in his chest, the compression, the narrowing, the moment where every path forward collapsed into a single point. And then, from the hallway behind them, a voice. I don't want to go. Everyone turned. Lila stood at the edge of the room, the rabbit under her arm, her braid over one shoulder, her brown eyes fixed on Vivian Holt, with an expression that had no business being on the face of a 7-year-old. It was calm, steady, absolute. I don't want to go with you, she said. I want to stay with my dad. Holt crouched down, the way adults do when they're trying to meet a child at eye level. Her voice softened, professional softness, practiced softness, the kind that comes from training manuals. Sweetheart, I understand, but sometimes you're the paper lady, Lila said. Holt blinked. Excuse me? You're the one who sends the papers. My dad gets them in the mail, white envelopes with the blue stamp. He hides them in the box, but I see them. Lila's voice didn't tremble. You've been trying to take me away for a long time. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jace had ever heard.
Holt straightened slowly. Her professional mask held, but something had cracked behind it. A fissure, barely visible, in the surface of a woman who had built her career on the certainty that she was doing the right thing and had just been confronted by a child who saw her as the enemy. She looked at Rachel, then at Jace, then at Eric, whose face was a ruin of grief and shame and something fierce that hadn't been there an hour ago. The raw, animal look of a parent watching someone reach for his child. "Mr. Hartwell," Holt said, "I need to speak with you privately." "Anything you say to him, you say in front of his advocate," Rachel said. "This is a county matter. And he has the right to representation at every stage. That's not discretionary." Holt's jaw tightened. She looked at the removal order in her hand, looked at Lila, who hadn't moved, who stood with her rabbit and her braid and her terrible calm, like a small statue carved from something harder than stone. Then Holt's phone rang. She answered it, listened. Her face changed. Not dramatically, subtly. The way a building changes when the foundation shifts. Everything looks the same, but the angles are suddenly wrong. Her eyes moved to Eric, and what Jace saw in them was something he hadn't expected. Not hostility, not bureaucratic resolve, confusion. And underneath the confusion, something colder. "I see," she said into the phone. "When was this filed? And the documentation? You verified it?" A pause. "All of it?" Another pause. "I'll need to review those records personally. Don't process anything until I've seen them." She hung up, stared at the phone for 2 seconds, then looked at Eric with an expression that made Jace's blood slow. "Mr. Hartwell, were you aware that your wife, Margaret, had a life insurance policy?" The room tilted. Eric's face went blank. Not the blankness of evasion, the blankness of a man who has just been asked a question in a language he doesn't speak. "What?" "A life insurance policy, taken out 14 months before her death, $200,000, with you as the sole beneficiary." No. Margaret didn't. We didn't have. The claim was filed 3 weeks after her death. The payout was processed and deposited into an account at First National Bank of Sullivan County. Eric shook his head. "There's no money. There's nothing. I couldn't pay the electric bill. I couldn't buy groceries. I don't know what The account isn't in your name, Mr. Hartwell." Silence. The space heater clicked. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on Industrial Way, its tires hissing on the wet road. "The account is in the name of your brother-in-law, Thomas Voss." Eric's face went through 3 stages in 4 seconds. Confusion, recognition. And then something that Jace recognized because he'd seen it in men who'd just realized the person they trusted most had put a knife between their ribs. "Tommy," Eric whispered. Thomas Voss filed the claim using documentation that listed him as the policy's beneficiary. The bank processed the deposit, $200,000. Holt's voice was clinical now, but her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Hartwell, the county's investigation into your financial situation included a review of your wife's estate records. This discrepancy was flagged 2 days ago. I was informed this morning." Eric's hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of exhaustion or cold, full shaking, visible from across the room. "He told me there was nothing," Eric said. "After Margaret died, Tommy handled He said he'd take care of the paperwork, the medical bills, the insurance, everything. He said there was nothing left. He said the bills ate it all. The bills were paid from a separate account. The insurance money was never touched for medical expenses. It was deposited, intact, into an account controlled solely by Thomas Voss." Jace watched Eric's face and saw the exact moment the man understood what had happened to him. Not the money. The money was the mechanism, the instrument. What Eric understood, standing in a biker clubhouse at 7 a.m. with a county caseworker and a removal order and a daughter who was watching everything, was that his wife's brother had stolen his future, had watched him lose his house, lose his job, lose his grip on reality, slide towards signing his daughter away to the state, and had said nothing, had let it happen, had let a man drown while sitting on the life raft, every bill that went unpaid, every night on a concrete floor. Every morning, Lila woke up alone. Every step of the 3-mile walk in the rain. All of it, every single piece of it, was unnecessary. Eric made a sound, low, guttural, not a word, something from the basement of the human voice, where language hasn't been invented yet. Jace moved before anyone else could. He put himself between Eric and the door. Not because he thought Eric was going to run, because he thought Eric was going to do something that would put him in a cell and put Lila in the system and make every sacrifice of the last 12 hours meaningless. Eric, his voice was iron, look at me. Eric's eyes were wild. The grief was gone. What replaced it was something Jace knew well. The incandescent molecular-level rage of a man who has just discovered that his suffering was manufactured, that it was done to him, on purpose, by someone he loved. Eric, look, at me. Eric's chest heaved. His fists were clenched so tight that the veins in his forearms stood out like cables. Your daughter is in this room. That landed. Eric's eyes snapped to Lila. She was standing where she'd been standing since the beginning, in the hallway, rabbit in her arms, watching her father with those ancient brown eyes. She didn't look scared. She looked like she was waiting to see what kind of man he was. The rage didn't leave Eric's face, but something joined it. Something that held the rage in place, kept it inside the walls instead of letting it blow the building apart. "What do I do?" Eric said. The words came out scraped, raw, like they'd been dragged over gravel. Jace looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Holt. And Holt, for the first time since she'd walked in, looked like a woman who'd come to do one thing and had just realized the situation was something else entirely. "Ms. Holt," Rachel said, "given this information, I would strongly advise that the county suspend the removal action pending investigation into the financial fraud that directly caused the conditions you intended to cite as grounds for removal." Mr. Hartwell didn't fail his daughter. He was systematically deprived of the resources that would have prevented this crisis. Holt stared at the removal order in her hand. The paper trembled slightly. Wind through a cracked window, or something else. "I need to make some calls," she said. She walked outside. The door closed behind her. The room exhaled. Not relief. Something before relief. The held breath between the crack of thunder and the knowledge of whether the tree is going to fall on your house or miss by a foot. Eric sank into a chair. His head dropped into his hands. His shoulders shook, but no sound came. Lila walked across the room, set the rabbit on the table, climbed into the chair beside her father, took his hand in both of hers, her small fingers wrapping around his knuckles, barely reaching halfway, and held on. Jace watched them. Then he looked at Forge, who stood against the wall with his arms crossed, his face carved from the same stone it was always carved from. And in Forge's eyes, Jace saw the thing they were both thinking but neither would say. The money meant Eric could survive. The money meant housing, food, stability, everything that had been stripped from him. But the money was in the hands of a man named Thomas Voss. And getting it back was going to require something that couldn't be done with paperwork and phone calls and licensed advocates. It was going to require the kind of conversation that happened in parking lots and back rooms, and the spaces between the law where men like Jace Mercer had spent their entire lives operating, the kind of conversation where the leather goes back on. Forge reached for his cut on the bar, unfolded it, held it in both hands. He didn't put it on. Not yet. But he held it the way a soldier holds a weapon before the order comes. Ready, waiting. The decision already made in every way except the final one. Jace's phone buzzed. Priest. Thomas Voss. 43. Margaret Hartwell's older brother. Address. 1847 Laurel Heights Drive, Sullivan County. Works in insurance. Drives a 2022 BMW X5. No criminal record. Country club member. Coaches Little League. The perfect citizen. The kind of man who shakes your hand at a fundraiser and smiles while your family bleeds out behind closed doors. Jace read the message. Read the address. Memorized it. Then he picked up his cut from the bar, unfolded it slowly, slid his arms through the leather, felt the weight settle on his shoulders, the patches, the name, the 12 years of everything he'd become and everything he'd survived and everything he was about to do. He looked at Eric. Stay here. Stay with your daughter. Don't leave this building. Where are you going? Jace zipped the cut. The sound of the zipper was small and final, like a round being chambered. To have a conversation. 3 bikes on a Sunday morning. Jace rode point, Forge on his left, a half-length behind, Wire on his right, the tremor in his hand invisible on the handlebars, because the vibration of the Harley swallowed it whole, the one place in the world where Danny Kaczynski's hands were steady. They rode east through the gray streets of Blackridge, past the boarded storefronts and the empty lots and the gas station where the attendant watched them pass without lifting his head, and then they were on County Road 7, climbing into the hills where the houses got bigger and the lawns got greener and the mailboxes had names on them instead of numbers. Laurel Heights was 15 minutes from the clubhouse, but it might as well have been a different country. Split-level homes with attached garages, landscaped yards, basketball hoops over driveways. The kind of neighborhood where people washed their cars on Saturdays and waved to the mail carrier and slept soundly because they'd never had a reason not to. 1847 sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. White siding, black shutters, a brick walkway lined with ornamental shrubs trimmed to geometric precision. A BMW X5 in the driveway. Charcoal gray, clean, the kind of clean that meant it was washed regularly by someone who was paid to wash it. Beside it, a minivan. 2 cars, 2 incomes. $200,000 stolen dollars funding a life that looked, from the outside, like everything Eric Hartwell had lost. Jace killed his engine at the curb. The silence was immediate and total. No traffic, no sirens, just the tick of cooling engines and the sound of a sprinkler system activating 2 houses down. "How do you want to play this?" Forge asked. "Straight. We knock, we talk, we walk out with what we came for." "And if he doesn't want to talk?" Jace dismounted. His boots hit the pavement. He adjusted his cut, the leather settling across his shoulders, the patches visible, the name Vandal catching the pale morning light. "Then we have a different kind of conversation." "Jace?" Forge's voice dropped. "We can't touch him, anything physical, and Holt uses it to bury Eric. You understand that?" "I understand it." "Do you?" "Because I've known you for 12 years, and I know what your face looks like when you've already decided to hit someone. And that's what your face looks like right now." Jace didn't answer. He walked up the brick path. Forge and Wire fell in behind him. 3 men in leather cuts approaching a suburban front door at 7:40 on a Sunday morning, and if any neighbor was watching through their curtains, the image would be something they'd talk about at dinner for a month. He rang the doorbell. 20 seconds. 30. The sound of footsteps inside. Soft, unhurried. The steps of a man who wasn't expecting anything on the other side of his door that couldn't wait. The door opened. Thomas Voss was exactly what Priest's file had described. 43. Medium build, going soft around the middle. Sandy hair thinning at the temples. Reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He wore a fleece pullover and khaki pants and held a coffee mug that said "World's Best Uncle," and the mug alone almost made Jace do something he'd regret. Voss looked at Jace, looked at the cut, looked past him at the 2 men on his walkway and the 3 Harleys at his curb. His face cycled through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, alarm, and then a 5th thing that settled over everything else like a mask being pulled on. Composure. Practiced. The composure of a man who'd been expecting this day, somewhere in the back of his mind, and had rehearsed his reaction. "Can I help you?" he said. Polite, measured, the voice of a man who coached Little League and attended HOA meetings and knew exactly how to sound like someone with nothing to hide. "Thomas Voss," Jace said, not a question. "That's right, and you are?" "Jace Mercer, Iron Wolves MC. We need to talk about your sister." Something flickered behind Voss's eyes. Fast, controlled, the way a candle flickers when a door opens somewhere in the house. A disturbance from a source you can't see. "Margaret passed away 8 months ago. I'm not sure what there is to talk about." $200,000. The flicker became something else. A stillness. The kind of stillness a man produces when every muscle in his body tenses simultaneously, and the only thing moving is the calculation behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Yeah, you do." "I think you should leave." "I think you should invite us in." I'm going to call the police. Go ahead. Jace took one step closer. Not aggressive, deliberate. Close enough that Voss could smell the leather and the exhaust and the coffee on Jace's breath, and the particular scent of a man who'd been awake for 26 hours and had stopped caring about the distance between patience and violence. Call them. Tell them 3 men showed up at your door asking about a life insurance policy that was supposed to go to your brother-in-law. Tell them the money went into your account instead. Tell them his 7-year-old daughter has been eating peanut butter in an empty house for 4 days because the man who was supposed to take care of the family's finances took the money and watched them starve. Voss's hand tightened on the coffee mug. His knuckles whitened around the handle. The world's best Uncle text stretched across his fingers. That's not what happened. Then tell me what happened. I don't owe you an explanation. I don't know you. You're trespassing on my property. Your niece walked 3 miles in the rain to ask a stranger how to get to an orphanage. She's 7 years old. She weighs maybe 45 pounds, and she walked 3 miles in a jacket that doesn't fit because her father can't afford to buy her a new one because you stole $200,000 from him. I didn't steal. Then where is it? A woman's voice from inside the house. Tommy? Who's at the door? Voss turned his head. It's nothing. Go back inside. Who are those men? I said go back inside. A pause. The sound of retreating footsteps. Voss turned back to Jace, and the mask had shifted. The composure was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched over something angular and desperate. You need to leave, he said. Lower this time, through his teeth. I will. As soon as you tell me how that money gets back to Eric. It's not that simple. Make it simple. Voss glanced past Jace at Forge and Wire. Forge stood with his arms at his sides, massive, silent, his dark eyes flat and unblinking. Wire leaned against the porch railing with his arms crossed, the silver tooth catching the light when he turned his head, his entire posture radiating the specific kind of calm that comes from a man who has been in rooms far more dangerous than this one and found them boring. Voss looked at these men, looked at the cuts, the scars, the hands, the eyes, and whatever calculation he'd been running behind that suburban composure reached its conclusion. Inside, he said, not here. He stepped back. Jace entered. Forge and Wire followed. The house was exactly what the outside promised. Hardwood floors, family photos on the walls, a living room with a sectional sofa, and a flat-screen TV and a basket of children's toys in the corner. Everything clean, everything arranged, everything radiating the particular aesthetic of a life that was being funded by someone else's catastrophe. Jace's eyes found the photos. Voss and his wife. Voss and 2 kids. Boys, maybe 10 and 12. And there, on the mantel, a framed photo of a woman with brown hair and kind eyes, holding a baby in a hospital bed. Margaret Hartwell. Holding Lila. The day she was born. He looked at the photo, and then he looked at Voss, and the disgust in his eyes must have been visible because Voss took a step backward. Sit down, Voss said. Nobody sat. The policy was Margaret's idea, Voss said. He set the coffee mug on the side table and crossed his arms, and the posture was defensive, elbows tight, shoulders up, the body language of a man building a wall out of his own limbs. She took it out when she was first diagnosed. She knew Eric wouldn't handle it. She told me that. She said he'd fall apart. So she made you the beneficiary? She asked me to manage the money, to use it for Lila, education, medical expenses, to make sure Eric didn't... He stopped. Didn't what? Didn't drink it away. Jace's jaw tightened. Eric doesn't drink. Margaret thought he might, after she was gone. She was worried. She asked me to hold the money and distribute it as Lila needed it. A trust, essentially. Informal. Informal meaning no paperwork. Meaning between family. Family. Jace let the words sit in the room like a stain. Your brother-in-law lost his house, lost his job. His daughter was alone in the dark for 4 days, and you, holding $200,000, did nothing. I was going to... When she was in foster care, when Eric was sleeping on the floor of an abandoned building, when exactly were you going to step in with the money that was supposed to protect them? Voss's composure cracked.
not all at once. A fracture line running from his forehead to his jaw, visible in the way his mouth pulled tight and his eyes darted to the photo on the mantel and back. You don't understand the situation. Explain it. Eric was... Voss ran a hand through his thinning hair. After Margaret died, he shut down, completely. Wouldn't answer the phone, wouldn't open the door. I went to the house 3 times in April, and he wouldn't let me in. He stopped showing up to work. He stopped paying bills. I tried. I offered to help with Lila, and he... His voice broke, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the performance. He told me to get out. He said I reminded him of Margaret. He said looking at me made it worse. Jace said nothing. He waited, because he'd learned a long time ago that silence was the most effective interrogation technique in the world. A man with a secret couldn't stand silence. It ate at the walls. Voss continued, faster now, the words tumbling out with the breathless quality of a confession that had been held underwater for months and was finally surfacing. I didn't steal the money. I held it. But then, expenses. My wife's job cut back hours. The mortgage, the boys' school. I moved some of the money to cover, to bridge. I was going to put it back. How much? What? How much did you move? Silence. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, the sprinkler hissed. Somewhere in the house, a child's footsteps crossed a hallway above them. How much, Thomas? 80,000. The number landed in the room like a body hitting the floor. Ford shifted his weight, a microscopic movement, barely visible, but Jace felt it, the vibration of a large man recalibrating his relationship with self-control. $80,000, Jace said, of a dead woman's insurance money. That was supposed to feed her daughter. I was going to replace it. With what? You're an insurance adjuster with 2 kids in private school and a mortgage in Laurel Heights. You don't have $80,000 to replace. You spent it, and you hoped nobody would notice because the man you stole it from was too destroyed to check. Voss's face collapsed. The mask, the composure, the suburban veneer, all of it fell away at once, and what was underneath was small and frightened and utterly ordinary. A man who'd told himself a story about temporary borrowing and good intentions and had watched that story curdle into something he couldn't undo. I'm not a bad person, he said. The words were almost a whisper. I don't care what you are. I care what you did, and here's what's going to happen. Jace pulled out his phone and set it on the side table, screen up, recorder running. Voss's eyes went to it, and his face drained of color. You're going to transfer the remaining $120,000 back into an account in Eric Hartwell's name by end of business tomorrow. You're going to sign a written acknowledgement that the full $200,000 was Margaret's insurance payout and that it was always intended for Eric and Lila. And you're going to set up a repayment plan for the $80,000 you spent, documented, notarized, witnessed. I can't. And in return, I will advise Eric not to press criminal charges for insurance fraud, theft by deception, and exploitation of a minor's assets. Because if this goes to the county prosecutor, Thomas, you don't lose money. You lose your house, your license, your coaching position, and about 6 to 8 years of your life in a state facility where men like me are the ones running things. Wire shifted by the door. The movement was small, a roll of the shoulders, a crack of the neck, but in the context of the room it landed like a hammer on an anvil. Voss flinched. This is coercion. This is a conversation between a man who stole from a child and the men who found out about it. What happens next is up to you. You can do the right thing, or you can do the wrong thing and find out what the right thing looks like when it's imposed. Forge spoke for the first time. His voice was low and unhurried and carried the particular weight of a man who chose every word the way a craftsman chooses every tool. Your sister trusted you, Forge said. She was dying and she looked at her brother and said, "Take care of my family." That's what she gave you, and you turned it into a swimming pool or a car payment or whatever you told yourself it was. He paused. If you've got any piece of Margaret left inside you, any piece at all, you'll fix this. Not because we're standing in your living room, because your niece is 7 years old and she's been eating peanut butter in the dark, and she still told the caseworker she wanted to stay with her dad. That kid earned better than what you gave her.
The room was silent. Voss stood in the center of his living room, his clean, warm, well-funded living room, and looked at the photo of his sister on the mantel. Margaret, smiling, holding a newborn Lila in a hospital bed. The woman who'd trusted him with everything and been repaid with nothing. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched. Something left his body. Not fight exactly, but the architecture that had been holding the fight upright, the scaffolding of denial. "I'll need a few days to arrange the transfer," he said. His voice was hollow. "You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. Henderson, Eric's attorney, will provide the account details and the acknowledgement document. You sign, you transfer, and this stays between us." Jace picked up his phone, stopped the recording. "Unless it doesn't. In which case, this recording goes to the Sullivan County prosecutor, your employer, your homeowners association, and every parent on your Little League team." Voss looked at him. There was nothing left in his eyes. No composure, no calculation, just the flat, exhausted gaze of a man who'd been running from something and had just hit the wall. "Get out of my house," he whispered. They left. The ride back to the clubhouse was fast and silent. The morning had brightened, but the sky stayed gray, the clouds low and heavy over Blackridge like a ceiling pressing down on a room that was already too small. Jace rode with his visor up, letting the cold air cut his face, letting the sting keep him in his body, because the alternative was to let his mind go to the place it wanted to go. The dark place, the old place, the room inside him where an 8-year-old boy stood on the steps of a county building and watched his mother drive away and learned, in that single moment, that the people who were supposed to protect you were the same people most capable of destroying you. They pulled into the lot. Jace killed his engine, sat on the bike for a moment, hands on the bars, chest rising and falling. Forge pulled up beside him. "He'll do it," Forge said. "He'll try to find a way out." "Henderson won't let him. The recording seals it." "Recordings can be challenged. Not when the alternative is a fraud prosecution. He's not brave enough to call the bluff." Jace dismounted. His legs were stiff. His back screamed from the old injury. He'd been awake for, he did the math, 31 hours. His body felt like it had been filled with sand and then set on fire. He walked inside. The clubhouse was warm. The space heater hummed. The smell of coffee and bacon hit him. Mama Jean at the stove, feeding people because that was what Mama Jean did when the world was falling apart. She fed it. Eric was at the table, Lila beside him, a plate of eggs in front of her, the rabbit on the chair next to her, a book open in her lap. She was reading and eating at the same time, her eyes moving between the pages and her fork, a small frown of concentration on her face. She looked up when Jace walked in. "Hi." "Hi. Did you have your conversation?" Jace almost smiled. Almost. "Yeah." "Was it a good conversation?" He looked at Eric. Eric's eyes were red, exhausted, but there was something in them that hadn't been there before. A flicker, faint, like the first spark in a cold engine. Not hope, not yet, but the raw material of hope, waiting for a reason to catch. "Getting there," Jace said. He sat at the bar and Mama Jean put a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. Black. 2 sugars. She'd remembered from 12 years of mornings in this room, from the first day a 19-year-old kid with a garbage bag of clothes and a chip on his shoulder the size of Ohio had walked through the door, and she'd said, "Sit down, I'll feed you." And he'd looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language because nobody had fed him in years. He drank the coffee and called Henderson. "It's done." Voss admitted to taking the money. 80,000 spent, 120 remaining. He'll transfer by tomorrow. "And the 80? Repayment plan, documented." Henderson was quiet for a moment. "I'll draft the acknowledgement and the repayment agreement. I'll have them at Voss's house by noon." "What about Holt? That's the other thing I need to tell you." Henderson's voice shifted. Not quite worried, but weighted. The voice of a lawyer approaching a problem from a direction that didn't have a clear precedent. "Holt didn't leave. She's been sitting in her car outside the clubhouse since 7:30. Jace turned and looked out the window. The White County sedan was still there, parked at the curb, engine off. Vivian Holt behind the wheel, a phone to her ear, a folder in her lap. "What is she doing?" talking to her supervisor, talking to the magistrate, talking to I don't know who else, but she hasn't filed the removal order and she hasn't left, which means she's either building a bigger case or she's reconsidering. Which one? If I had to guess, both. The insurance fraud changes the narrative. It's no longer a negligent father. It's a defrauded father. That's a different legal category. Holt knows it. But she's also got a professional reputation built on removal actions and reversing course in a case where she's already obtained a signed order from a magistrate makes her look indecisive. She's stuck between what's right and what's safe for her career. What do? Nothing. We wait. We let her come to us. The worst thing you can do right now is push. She pushes back by reflex. That's how she's wired. But if the information reaches her organically, through the legal channels, through the documentation, she'll have no choice but to adjust. And if she doesn't, then we file our own motion, emergency petition to block removal, citing newly discovered evidence of financial fraud as the proximate cause of the conditions cited in the removal order. I can have it before a judge by Tuesday. Tuesday is 2 days away. Yes. She's sitting outside with a removal order right now. I'm aware. Which is why I said wait. She hasn't executed it. Every minute she doesn't is a minute in our favor. Jace hung up, stared at the white sedan through the window. Holt was still on the phone, still writing, still sitting in her car like a loaded weapon that hadn't decided which direction to point. The morning crept forward. 9 a.m., 10, 11. Jace sat in the main room and didn't move. Forge sat on the couch and didn't move. Wire stood by the door and didn't move. 3 men in a room, waiting, watching a car through a window, burning through the kind of patience that felt like holding a live wire with your bare hands and being told not to let go. Lila finished her book, asked Mama Jean for another one. When there wasn't one, Mama Jean gave her a deck of cards and taught her solitaire at the kitchen table, while Eric sat beside them with his hands around a coffee cup he'd stopped drinking from 2 hours ago, staring at a spot on the wall where a motorcycle calendar hung, showing a month that was already past. At 11:47, Jace's phone rang. Priest. We've got a problem. Jace's stomach dropped. Talk. Voss made a call 20 minutes ago, not to a lawyer, to a man named Dale Sykes. Who's Dale Sykes? Sullivan County Board of Supervisors, District 3. And here's the part you're going to like. Vivian Holt's direct appointee. Sykes is the county official who hired her 6 months ago. He's also on the board of First National Bank, where Voss's account holding the insurance money is located. Jace closed his eyes. It gets better. Sykes and Voss play golf together. Their kids are on the same travel baseball team. They're friends, Jace. Close friends. Close enough that when Voss picked up the phone and said, "Bikers are threatening me over money," Sykes didn't ask questions. He made a call of his own. To who? To Holt. Everything stopped. Jace opened his eyes, looked through the window at the white sedan. Holt was no longer on the phone. She was sitting still, staring straight ahead, her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Priest? What did Sykes tell her? I don't know exactly, but I know the timing. Holt's been sitting outside your building for 4 hours. 20 minutes ago, she got a call from Sykes. And now she's not reconsidering anymore. No. Now she has political cover. Sykes gives her the green light, she executes the removal, and it's not just a caseworker acting on protocol. It's a county-backed action with institutional support. And if anyone challenges it, Sykes backs her up. And if the insurance fraud surfaces, it gets buried in a county review process that Sykes controls. Jace stood. The chair scraped the floor. Ma, how long? She could move any time. She's got the order. She's got the signature. All she needs is to walk through your door. Jace looked at Eric, at Lila, at the deck of cards on the table, and the rabbit on the chair, and the small temporary world they'd built inside these walls over the course of a single night. A world made of soup and braids and borrowed blankets, and the stubborn, fragile belief that a father and daughter could be kept together if enough people refused to let them be pulled apart. And outside, in a white sedan, a woman was preparing to dismantle all of it. He called Henderson. The old lawyer answered on the first ring. Voss called Dale Sykes. Sykes called Holt. The county's backing the removal. Henderson was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time for Luther Henderson. That changes things. How much? Significantly. If Sykes is involved, this is no longer a caseworker's discretion. It's a political decision, and political decisions don't respond to legal arguments. They respond to political consequences. Meaning we need to make this public, fast, before Holt walks in that door. Public how? The insurance fraud, the money, the connection between Voss and Sykes. If it's in the open, if a reporter has it, if it's documented and distributed, then Sykes can't bury it and Holt can't pretend the removal is about child safety when it's actually about protecting a friend of a county supervisor. We don't have a reporter. You have a phone. You have Priest, who seems to know everything about everyone in this county. And you have... Henderson paused. You have Rachel. Jace looked at Forge. Forge was already looking at him. Rachel has connections, Henderson continued. The nonprofit she works for, Families Forward Alliance. They've challenged county removal actions before. They have media contacts, advocacy networks. If she makes one phone call, this stops being a Blackridge story and becomes a state story. She came here for an assessment, not to go to war with a county supervisor. Then someone needs to ask her if she's willing to expand the scope of her engagement. Jace hung up and crossed the room to where Rachel sat at the bar, her laptop open, her assessment report on the screen, a half-eaten piece of toast beside her elbow. Rachel. She looked up, read his face. Something in her expression tightened, not fear, but recognition. The look of a woman who understood that the situation had just changed weight class. What happened? He told her. Voss, Sykes, the call to Holt, the political machinery that was now grinding its gears around a 7-year-old girl like a machine designed to produce one specific outcome regardless of the facts. Rachel listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for 10 seconds. She looked at her laptop, looked at the assessment, looked through the kitchen doorway at Lila, who was laying cards on the table one by one, counting under her breath. The rabbit watching from the next chair with its one remaining ear bent at an angle that looked almost attentive. If I make this call, Rachel said, I'm not advocating for a client anymore. I'm challenging a county system. I'm accusing a supervisor of corruption. I'm putting my organization's name on a case that could go sideways in a dozen different ways. She looked at Jace. And I'm doing it in a building owned by a motorcycle club, which is not exactly the optics my board of directors would approve of. I know. And you're asking me anyway. I'm asking you because there's a kid in that kitchen who memorized the route to an orphanage because she thought it was the only thing she could do. I'm asking you because a man named Thomas Voss stole her future, and a man named Dale Sykes is about to help him bury the evidence. And I'm asking you because your brother, Jace glanced at Forge, your brother has spent the last 12 hours proving that the men you called too damaged to function are the only people in this town who gave a damn. Rachel looked at Forge. Forge looked back. The 3 years of silence between them was visible, a weight in the air, a gravity that pulled at both of them. Curtis didn't speak. He didn't have to. He just stood there, in his leather cut, with his scarred hands and his steady eyes, and he was exactly who he was. And for the first time in 3 years, his sister saw it without the filter of her disappointment. Give me 20 minutes, she said. She picked up her phone and walked outside, past Holt's sedan, past the bikes, to the edge of the lot where the chain-link fence met the sidewalk. She stood there in the cold and made her call. Jace watched her through the window. Then his eyes moved to Holt's car. The caseworker's door was opening. Holt stepped out, folder in hand, phone in pocket. She straightened her coat, adjusted her ID badge, and began walking toward the clubhouse door with the measured, deliberate steps of a woman who had received her instructions and intended to carry them out. Every man in the room felt it. The shift. The tipping point. The moment where everything that had been building, the night, the mill, the diner, the soup, the braid, the drawing on the wall, the 3-mile walk, the document, the money, the lie, the phone calls, all of it converging into a single point in time and space. A woman with a removal order walking toward a door, and behind that door, a little girl playing cards with a one-eared rabbit. Jace moved to the door, opened it, stood in the frame. Holt stopped 3 feet away. Her face was set, her eyes were professional,
But underneath the professionalism, something else moved. The faintest tremor of a woman who was doing something she wasn't entirely sure about, but was going to do it anyway because the machinery demanded it. Mr. Mercer, I've received additional guidance from my supervisor. I'm here to execute the emergency removal of Lila Hartwell.
Based on what? Based on the documented conditions at the Willow Creek Road residence, the 4-day absence of the custodial parent, and my determination that the child's current placement in a facility owned by an unregistered organization with no child care license does not meet the threshold of adequate supervision. You have a licensed social worker inside who assessed the child 2 hours ago and determined she's safe. Ms. Williams' assessment is noted, but final authority rests with the county. I have a signed removal order, Mr. Mercer. I'd prefer to execute it cooperatively. Behind him, inside the clubhouse, a sound, a chair pushing back, small feet on the floor. And then Lila was beside him, standing in the doorway, the rabbit under her arm, her braid over her shoulder, looking up at Vivian Holt with those brown eyes that held more understanding than any 7-year-old should possess. You came back, Lila said. Holt looked down at her. The professional mask held, but something behind it was fracturing, something human, something that remembered why she'd gotten into this work in the first place, before the politics and the metrics and the approval ratings. Lila, I need you to... My uncle stole my mom's money. Holt froze. The man you talked to on the phone, Mr. Sykes. He's my uncle's friend. My uncle took my mom's money, and that's why my dad can't take care of me, and now Mr. Sykes told you to come take me because they don't want anyone to find out. The silence that followed was so complete that Jace could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the sprinkler 2 houses down on Laurel Heights, could hear the wind moving through the chain-link fence where Rachel Williams stood with a phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to someone who was about to change the trajectory of everything. Holt stared at Lila. Her folder hung at her side. The removal order was visible. The top edge of the document, the magistrate's signature, the seal of Sullivan County. How do you know that? Holt whispered. I listen, Lila said. I always listen. Nobody thinks kids listen, but we do. From the edge of the lot, Rachel's voice raised, carrying across the gravel. Yes, Sullivan County. The supervisor's name is Sykes. I need a journalist, and I need one now. We have 45 minutes. Holt's head turned toward Rachel, then back to Lila, then to Jace. And in her eyes, in the space between duty and conscience, between the paper in her hand and the child in front of her, something broke open that couldn't be put back together. She looked at the removal order, looked at it the way a person looks at a weapon they've been carrying for so long they forgot it was loaded. Then she looked at Lila. And the folder, with the order, with the magistrate's signature, with the full institutional weight of Sullivan County behind it, the folder stayed at her side. She didn't raise it. She didn't open it. She stood on the threshold of that clubhouse, 3 feet from a 7-year-old girl holding a one-eared rabbit, and she did not move. And in that frozen moment, in the space between one breath and the next, between the machinery of the county and the conscience of a single woman, the outcome hung by a thread so thin you could have cut it with a whisper. Vivian Holt stood on the threshold for 11 seconds. Jace counted them the way he'd counted the seconds in Lila's bedroom doorway, because counting kept him inside his body, kept his hands still, kept the machinery of his instincts from overriding the part of him that understood this moment couldn't be forced. It had to be given. By her. By a woman holding a piece of paper that could erase a family, standing 3 feet from a child who had just told her the truth with the calm precision of someone who'd been carrying it alone for months. On the 12th second, Holt crouched down. Not the way she'd crouched before, so practiced, professional, the textbook posture of a caseworker meeting a child at eye level. This was different. This was a woman whose knees gave out halfway and who caught herself with one hand on the doorframe, her folder pressed against her chest, her reading glasses swinging on their chain. She crouched until she was looking directly into Lila's face, and what moved across her own was something Jace recognized because he'd felt it himself. The collision between what you've been told to do and what you know is right, and the sickening realization that they are not the same thing. Lila, Holt said. Her voice had changed. The professional veneer was gone. What remained was raw, scraped, human,
The voice of a woman who had spent 6 months building a reputation on decisive action and had just been confronted by the possibility that decisive action was the wrong kind of action. "How do you know about Mr. Sykes?" "I heard Uncle Tommy on the phone, at his house. Last time Daddy took me there, before he got really sad. Uncle Tommy was in the garage and I was looking for the bathroom, and I heard him talking to someone named Dale about the money. He said Margaret would never know, but Mommy was already gone by then, so I knew he meant Daddy would never know." Holt closed her eyes, opened them. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I told Daddy. He didn't hear me. He was already too sad to hear things." Behind Jace, in the room, the sound of Eric's breath catching, a sharp, involuntary intake. The sound of a man realizing his daughter had tried to save him months ago, and he'd been too deep in his own wreckage to listen. Holt looked at the folder in her hands, looked at it for a long time. Then she stood slowly and turned to Jace. "I'm going to request a 72-hour continuance on the removal order," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady, the voice of a woman who had made a decision and was going to have to defend it to people who wouldn't want to hear it. "I'm going to file a supplemental report noting the allegations of financial fraud and the potential conflict of interest involving Supervisor Sykes, and I'm going to recommend that the county pursue an investigation into the insurance payout before any custody action is taken." "What happens to Lila in the meantime?" "She stays with her father, under supervised care." Holt looked at Rachel, who had come back across the lot and stood at the edge of the porch, phone still in her hand, her expression sharp and waiting. "Ms. Williams, are you willing to serve as the supervising advocate during the continuance period?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Holt nodded. She looked at Lila one more time. The girl stood in the doorway with her rabbit, her braid, her ancient eyes. She didn't smile, didn't thank anyone. She just watched, the way she'd been watching everything, carefully, quietly, with the terrible patience of a child who'd learned that the world was a place where you had to pay attention because nobody was going to pay attention for you. "I'll be in touch," Holt said. She walked back to her car, got in, sat behind the wheel for a full minute without starting the engine. Then the sedan pulled out of the lot and turned east on Industrial Way and disappeared into the gray morning light. Jace leaned against the doorframe. His legs were trembling. 33 hours without sleep, and the adrenaline that had been holding him upright was draining out through his boots like oil from a cracked pan. He felt Forge's hand on his shoulder, brief, heavy, the weight of a man saying everything he needed to say through 5 pounds of pressure and 3 seconds of contact. "It's not over," Jace said. "No," Forge agreed, "but the worst part is." It wasn't. Not quite. But it was close enough that Jace let himself believe it for the length of one breath. The next 48 hours moved with the grinding, exhausting momentum of machinery that has been set in motion and cannot be stopped. Henderson filed the emergency petition Monday morning, a 12-page document citing financial fraud, institutional conflict of interest, and failure of county oversight, supported by Rachel's assessment, Priest's research, and the recording from Voss's living room. He filed it with Judge Patricia Engel, a family court jurist in the next district over, specifically chosen because she had no connection to Sykes, no history with Holt, and a reputation for reading every page of every document put in front of her before making a decision. Voss transferred the remaining $120,000 into an account in Eric Hartwell's name by 4:30 Monday afternoon, 45 minutes before Jace's deadline, not because he'd had a change of heart, but because Henderson had called him at noon and explained, in the measured tones of a man who had been practicing law since before Voss was born, that the recording from Sunday morning constituted an admission of fiduciary fraud and that the Sullivan County Prosecutor's Office had been informally notified. The transfer was completed. The acknowledgement was signed. The repayment plan for the $80,000, 12 monthly installments, notarized, witnessed by Henderson's paralegal, was executed and filed. On Tuesday, the story broke. Not in the Black Ridge Gazette, which had a staff of 3 and hadn't broken a story since a water main burst in 2019. It broke on the Columbus Dispatch website, a 1,200-word article with the headline, "Sullivan County Child Removal Linked to Insurance Fraud and Political Connections." Rachel's organization, Families Forward Alliance, had provided the documentation.
The article named Voss, named Sykes, named the connection between them, and described, without identifying Lila by name, because Rachel had insisted on that, a 7-year-old girl who had walked 3 miles to ask strangers for help because the system designed to protect her had been compromised by the people who were supposed to run it. By Wednesday afternoon, Sykes had recused himself from all matters related to Child Protective Services in Sullivan County. By Thursday, the state attorney general's office had opened a preliminary inquiry into the insurance payout. By Friday, Vivian Holt had withdrawn the removal order. She didn't call. She sent a letter. 2 paragraphs. Addressed to Eric Hartwell, care of Luther Henderson, attorney at law. The county was closing the emergency removal action. The investigation into the home conditions was being reclassified as resolved. The file would remain open for 6 months for routine follow-up, during which Rachel Williams would serve as the family's advocate. Henderson read the letter to Eric over the phone. Eric listened in the kitchen of the apartment above Ratchet's shop. The apartment that was now his, month to month, rent covered by the insurance money that should have been his all along. Lila sat at the kitchen table doing homework, real homework, from a real school, because Rachel had enrolled her at Blackridge Elementary on Monday, and she'd started Tuesday and come home with a worksheet about fractions and the news that a girl named Sophie had asked her to sit together at lunch. Eric hung up the phone, set it on the counter, put both hands flat on the surface and stood there, breathing, his shoulders rising and falling with the slow, deep rhythm of a man who had been holding his breath for 8 months and had finally been told he could exhale. Lila looked up from her worksheet. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Are you okay?" He turned to look at her. His eyes were wet, but his face was steady. A face that had been rebuilt, not restored. The cracks were still there. They would always be there. But something had been poured into them. Not gold, nothing that precious or decorative, but something functional and load-bearing, like concrete, like the stuff you use when you need a thing to hold weight, not win prizes. "I'm okay," he said. And for the first time since March, it wasn't a lie. Spring came to Blackridge the way spring always comes to towns that have stopped expecting it. Slowly, grudgingly, like a guest who wasn't sure they'd been invited. The snow melted off the Monarch Mill's roof in long, dirty sheets. The trees along Willow Creek Road put out buds so pale they looked like they were asking permission. The days got longer by minutes that felt like hours, and the light changed from the flat gray of winter to something with warmth in it, something that actually landed on your skin instead of just passing through. Jace saw the changes from the seat of his Road King, riding the routes he'd been riding for 12 years. Route 9, the Mill District, the back roads through the hills. But seeing them differently now, the way you see a room differently after you've rearranged the furniture. Not better, necessarily, just not the same. Eric was working. Forge had gotten him a position at the auto shop. Not charity, not a handout, but a legitimate job rebuilding engines alongside a man named Ratchet, who didn't care about your past, didn't care about your story, and only cared whether you showed up on time and could tell the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench. Eric could. He'd been a grounds maintenance worker, not a mechanic, but his hands were good, and his attention to detail was precise, and Ratchet said he learned fast, and that was enough. The apartment filled up, not with expensive things, with functional things. A table, chairs that matched, a bookshelf that Forge built from reclaimed wood from the mill, sanded and stained and set against the wall in Lila's room, where it held library books and school books, and a growing collection of paperbacks that Mama Jean brought over every Saturday in a grocery bag, 1 bag per week, always with a note inside that said, "Read this one first." Even though Mama Jean would deny writing the notes if anyone asked, the rabbit sat on Lila's pillow, still gray, still matted, still missing 1 ear. Eric had offered to fix it, to sew the ear back on or buy a new one. And Lila had looked at him with an expression that made him stop mid-sentence. "I like him the way he is," she'd said. "He's been through stuff." Eric had nodded. Because what do you say to that? What do you say to a 7-year-old who understands that damage doesn't make a thing less valuable? It makes it real. The counseling started in April. Eric drove to Sullivan County twice a week, Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings, to sit in a small office with a woman named Dr. Reeves, who had gray hair and kind eyes, and a box of tissues on the corner of her desk that she never pushed toward him, just left there, close enough to reach if he needed to. He talked about Margaret, about the diagnosis, about the 3 months of watching her disappear by degrees, the hospice bed in the living room, the sound of the machines, the last morning when she'd opened her eyes and looked at him and said something he still couldn't repeat aloud, because the words belonged to her, and he wasn't ready to share them with anyone else. He talked about Lila, about the guilt, the drowning, suffocating, marrow-deep guilt of a man who had looked at his own daughter and decided she was better off without him. Dr. Reeves didn't tell him the guilt was wrong. She told him the guilt was real and that real things needed to be carried, not erased, and that carrying them got easier if you let other people help you hold the weight. He talked about the mill, about the floor, about the pen with its cap off and the document that Jace had torn into pieces in a gravel parking lot on a rainy night in October. "Do you know what happened to the pieces?" Dr. Reeves asked. "No." "Does it matter?" Eric thought about it. "No, because they weren't the point. The paper was just paper. The point was that someone showed up. Someone walked into that building and said, 'Stand up,' and I did." Rachel came to Blackridge once a month. She drove the silver Accord from Columbus, parked between the Harleys, and walked into the clubhouse like she owned it, which in a way she did, because without her the whole thing would have fallen apart. And everyone knew it. And she carried that knowledge with the particular grace of a woman who had learned to accept credit from people she hadn't expected to admire. She and Forge had lunch at Marge's diner the second Saturday of every month. They sat in the back booth, the same booth where Lila had walked up to a table full of bikers and asked for directions. And they ate cheeseburgers and drank coffee and talked about things that had nothing to do with custody orders or county supervisors or the 3 years they'd spent pretending the other one didn't exist. It wasn't fixed. Not completely. Rachel still didn't approve of the club. Still didn't understand why her brother wore a leather cut and rode a motorcycle and surrounded himself with men who carried their damage like a uniform. But she'd seen what those men had done for a stranger's child on a rainy night in October, and the scene had rearranged something inside her that she couldn't put back the way it had been. She didn't say this aloud. Curtis didn't ask. Some things repair themselves not through conversation, but through proximity, through showing up, again and again, until the distance closes on its own. On a Saturday in late May, the Iron Wolves held a cookout behind the clubhouse. Not a party. The Iron Wolves didn't throw parties. A cookout. Burgers, hot dogs, a folding table with potato salad and coleslaw, a cooler full of ice and soda, and bottles of water. Ratchet manned the grill with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. Mama Jean supervised from a lawn chair with a glass of sweet tea and a look that could stop a charging bull. Eric stood by the fence with a bottle of water, watching Lila ride a bicycle across the gravel lot. The bike was new, a gift from the club, pooled money, nothing fancy, purple with white streamers on the handlebars that whipped in the wind when she pedaled fast. She rode in wide circles, the rabbit strapped to the rear rack with a bungee cord, its one ear flapping. Jace watched from the shop bay door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. Wire stood beside him, rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. He'd been trying to quit since January, which meant he now carried cigarettes he didn't smoke and chewed toothpicks instead, and the toothpick tucked behind his ear made him look like a character from a movie he would have hated. "She's fast," Wire said. "Kid's been covering distance since before any of us knew her name. You ever think about what would have happened if she'd walked into a different diner?" Jace didn't answer right away. He watched Lila take the corner by the fence, her body leaning into the turn, the streamers cutting the air, the rabbit bouncing on the rack. She was smiling, not the careful, measured expression she'd worn in Marge's diner 8 months ago, the neutral face of a child who'd learned to manage her own emotions because nobody else was managing them for her. This was different. This was the unguarded, full-body smile of a kid on a bike on a warm day, with nowhere to be and nobody to worry about, and the whole afternoon stretching out in front of her like an open road. "No," Jace said. "I don't think about that." "Why not?" "Because she didn't walk into a different diner. She walked into ours. And that's the only version of the story that matters." Lila completed another lap and skidded to a stop beside the grill, where Ratchet handed her a hot dog on a paper plate without interrupting his conversation with Forge about the correct torque specification for a 2003 Road King's rear axle nut. She ate standing up, one hand on the handlebars, and then she set the plate on the table and rode back out into the lot. She made one more circle. Then she turned and pedaled over to where Jace stood in the doorway. She braked. The bike wobbled. She put one foot down and looked up at him. "Remember when I asked you for directions to the orphanage?" Jace looked down at her. The scar on his face caught the late afternoon light. The raised tissue a shade lighter than the surrounding skin. A map of a moment he'd survived and carried forward. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A shift in pressure, a tightness that loosened, a door that had been locked for 33 years opening a crack. "Yeah," he said. "I remember." Lila looked back at the lot, at the bikes parked in a row, chrome glinting, at Forge and Ratchet at the grill, at Wire with his unlit cigarette, at Mama Jean in her lawn chair, at Rachel sitting on the porch steps with her shoes off and her feet in the grass, at her father standing by the fence, watching her with eyes that were clear and present and focused in a way they hadn't been for 8 months. Eyes that saw her, really saw her, not through the fog of grief or the distortion of shame, but directly, the way a father is supposed to see his daughter, like she was the most important thing in any room, like she was the reason the room existed at all. "I'm glad you didn't give me directions," she said. Jace's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent. Something that lived in the neighborhood of smiles but hadn't fully committed to being one. The expression of a man who'd spent 33 years learning not to feel things and was, slowly, imperfectly, beginning to unlearn it. "You didn't need directions, Lila. You knew exactly where you were going." She considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old processing a compliment she wasn't sure she agreed with. "I was going to the orphanage." "No, you were going to the one place in town where someone would listen. You just didn't know that's what you were doing." She looked at him, then at the rabbit on the back of her bike, its one ear bent, its body matted and worn and thoroughly, irreversibly loved. "He needs a name," she said. "The rabbit?" "Yeah. I never gave him one. Mom gave him to me when I was 3, but I never named him. I think he should have a name now." "Why now?" "Because before he was just a rabbit. Now he's been through stuff. Things that go through stuff need names, otherwise nobody remembers they were there." Jace felt the words land in his chest, felt them settle into the space beside everything else he carried. The group homes, the garbage bags, the county building steps, the mother who drove away, the years of concrete floors and locked doors, and the slow grinding process of building a self out of spare parts and stubbornness. Things that go through stuff need names. Otherwise, nobody remembers they were there. "What are you going to name him?" he asked. Lila thought about it. The afternoon light moved across her face. The streamers on her handlebars stirred in a breeze that smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and the first warm evening of a season that had taken its time arriving. "Vandal," she said. She pedaled away before he could respond. Back into the lot, back into her wide, looping circles, the rabbit, Vandal, bouncing on the rack behind her, its one ear catching the wind like a flag. Jace watched her go. He stayed in the doorway for a long time. The cookout continued around him. The sounds of conversation and laughter, and the sizzle of the grill, and the clink of bottles, and the low, constant hum of men and women who had, through some combination of stubbornness and damage, and the refusal to look away, assembled themselves into something that functioned like a family, even if it didn't look like one. Wire appeared beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, didn't say anything, just stood there, the two of them watching a 7-year-old girl ride a purple bicycle in circles around a gravel lot behind a motorcycle clubhouse in a dying town in Ohio, with a one-eared rabbit named after a biker strapped to the back. The engines would start again tomorrow. The road would unspool in front of them the way it always did. Long, uncertain, cracked in places, smooth in others, leading to destinations they couldn't predict and wouldn't have chosen and would navigate anyway because that was what they did. That was what they'd always done. Not because the road was kind, because stopping was worse. But tonight, this one specific, unrepeatable tonight, the engines were off. The road could wait. The gravel lot was warm. The grill was smoking. A little girl was laughing. And somewhere between the diner and the mill and the clubhouse and the courthouse and the apartment where a father was learning to live again,
The distance between lost and found had been closed by the only thing that had ever closed it. Not a map, not a system, not a signature on a line, just people. Scarred, broken, stubborn, unwilling to quit people. Who showed up, who stayed, who rode through the rain when it would have been easier to stay dry. The sun dropped behind the mill's cold smokestacks and the sky turned the color of a bruise healing. Purple at the edges, gold at the center, and at the horizon, a thin line of light that held on longer than it should have, as if it wasn't quite ready to let go. Neither were they.